Love at First Sight, Chapter 1. The introduction is literally a few words on the story from me personally. I felt an unforgettable emotion from reading it, so enjoy watching it and appetite if you eat. I heard Maddie before I met her. I was at one of those endless parties. The hour was late. People were getting more and more drunk. Strange and disturbing things were happening in dark corners. As usual, it didn't concern me. I was hanging out on the sidelines because I hadn't yet decided to take holy orders. Nevertheless, the chances of solving the chastity problem were slim. My abstinence depended on other people's choices. It's not that I was Quasimodo. It's just that I didn't have that easy flirtation. In fact, I don't have a single thin bone in my body. Women tell me I'm too honest. I kind of understand that. Everyone expects me to talk casually, at least at the introduction stage. Life is short for me. Or maybe I'm that insecure. Anyway, I'm not sophisticated. Obviously, no one wants that, no woman. They need long bouts of flattery and subtle hints, suggestions, not unsubstantiated statements. I've been working on my game for all of my 20s, and I've had enough girls to dispel most rumors that I'm of normal orientation. But it wasn't until my 29th year that I actually hooked up with a woman. I always get the ones who need it. Linda was attractive, beautiful, but she was almost as socially retarded as I was. She was the kind of girl who likes to pick out the wedding china on the third date. I thought she was the one. Mostly because she didn't run screaming outside when I told her I had absolutely no problem with it. It was obvious from the start that she was the best I could do. Our personal flaws simply complemented each other. We were very well suited for each other. In fact, we hit it off so often that she got knocked up 2 months after we met. She didn't seem to believe in birth control, and I was simple-minded enough not to ask. To be honest, I was fine with it. At that stage, getting married was something out of the ordinary, like joining the Boy Scouts at 11. I've already had a very successful career. I do pen testing. I hack into other people's computers and tell them how I did it. Companies pay a lot of money for that knowledge. This is probably the only job that a socially disadvantaged nerd like me can succeed in. Linda and I moved into an apartment in Germantown, Maryland, and very soon we had 3 children. It was then that I discovered, to my utter amazement and delight, that I really loved this baby. Admittedly, up until that point, I was a true man of nowhere. I was adrift, grabbing convenient targets wherever and whenever I found them. I wasn't interested in anything, at least not enough to care much, and there was no emotional investment in the relationship, ever. This was true of my marriage as well. Bill Jr. made a difference. I knew I was hooked on him as soon as I saw him. I spent most of the first few months of his life just playing with him. I would do anything to see Billy smile. Most of my work took place in the virtual world, so I was in the apartment more often than Linda was. She had a big job at Nest, which was just down the road in Gaithersburg, and she was gone from morning to night. I didn't care because I had my baby and my very well-paid cyber universe with zero knowledge. In fact, Linda has always been more of a neighbor with benefits than a wife. I don't know what I expected from this arrangement, but what I did get was divorce papers. It seems Linda got a better offer from a guy she met at a party in DC. The whole time I was watching the guy they were spending the evenings with. Frankly, I was relieved to cut her out of my life. The thing is, once she had Billy, she went back to being an amazingly self-centered bitch. Neither Billy nor I needed it. So we shared the DVD collection, which was pretty much all we owned together. She took her clothes and disappeared into the Reston wilderness. I wished her all the best. This brought me back to the horniness problem I've been trying to solve for months now. That night, Billy was at my parents' house. In the time since his mother had gone missing, my parents had been his only family. Like me, they loved the baby. They both wanted me to be a couple. They said Billy needed a woman in his life. So they were more than happy to take care of him anytime I was looking for a replacement for him. In the morning, we were off to IHOP. But tonight was my night of wandering. The hunt was uneventful. So before I went to my room, I went upstairs to urinate one last time. At that moment, I heard loud noises coming from the other end of the hallway. My ears popped, and with them something else. The voyeur that I am, I should have seen it. I opened the door slowly. I didn't really need to be delicate. There were 4 guys in various stages of undress, wandering around the room. No one was wearing pants. Most were wearing shirts. Except for the 5th guy, who was lying between the woman's legs on the bed. The soles of her feet were pointed at the ceiling fan that was slowly rotating above their heads. She was emitting the loud shrieks that got me there in the first place. Every now and then, she would let out an even louder, "Oh yeah!" A real discussion broke out between the two guys who were watching. The one said, "Look how this fool is enjoying herself." Another told the one with her that he should hurry up because it was his turn, to which she added, "That's it. Keep going." I sat down in a comfortable chair to watch. At that moment, it was not only self-education, but also pure interest. Of course, I knew about the gang war. I just never witnessed it. I was really interested in the motives of those involved. It was obvious the guys wanted to have a real good time. Most guys my age would have been left with a hole in the wall, so the enthusiasm of the 5 of them was no mystery. However, it was unclear what the woman was getting out of it, other than stimulation. Notice I'm not saying stimulation is bad. It's just that it looks like she's been at it for at least 2 hours, so we can assume that her initial fervor has died down a bit. However, she still acted with her partner as if nothing had happened yet. The guy who was currently saluting grunted loudly, and I saw him arch his back for a few seconds, and she muttered contentedly. Then he backed away from her. It looked like he was holding the door for the next guy. The guy next in line replaced his buddy. At that moment, he and she raced again. She didn't even seem to interrupt her rush. She made an unintelligible sound of satisfaction and went back to work. It went on like that for another 20 minutes. I almost dozed off. During this time, all but one of the guys had left. The last one seemed to be waiting for his buddy to finish. Finally, I heard him say, "Oh yeah!" And the last guy did his part. He slowly pulled away as she continued to get high. Then he started to get dressed. He did it leisurely, like he was getting ready to go to work. She was still lying there. Both guys walked away, bantering with each other about their performance. It was a really touching moment. She lay quietly on her back with her knees tucked up. She looked completely used. She had that look 1,000 feet away. Meanwhile, her body was heaving with exertion. She had finally returned from whatever mystical journey she had been on. She asked almost casually, "So are you going to continue or not?" I just as nonchalantly replied, "No, I'm just curious." For a change, my mind filtered out my usual response, which was that I don't like to catch things. It was a strange situation. It was clearly a girl on the hoof. She wasn't drugged, or tied up, or even very drunk. How a woman who had just volunteered to spend the evening with 5 men could look so vulnerable and destitute was beyond me. But I even felt sorry for her. But the main emotion was curiosity. She replied, "Well, if you're not interested in touching me, why don't you at least give me a ride home?" The whole conversation went on, as if we had just run into each other at Starbucks and she was going to order a cab. It was creepy. I said, "I'd love it if you took a shower first." I thought it would be a little tactless to tell her that I didn't want my car seats dirty. She rose tiredly from the bed. I had seen the same awkward gesture in people who had just finished a marathon. She groaned and, hiding in the bathroom, said with a bitter chuckle, "I'm going to hate myself in the morning." I replied, "I don't doubt it," trying to hold back the sarcasm. It was like we were discussing the weather. I noticed that she, disappearing through the doorway, was graceful. I wondered why a girl with a body like that felt she needed to tug on the plume of uppity politicians to get attention. It piqued my interest. She had been there for a while, but she had something to wash herself with. She returned to the bedroom fresh and pink, wrapped in a towel and drying her wet hair. Her face was as first class as her body, a perfect oval with thick blonde hair framing it, big dark eyes, and a wide, sensual mouth. This woman was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. She had to ride in a fancy harness for these guys to carry her around like a queen. Now I was really curious. I don't have a degree in psychology, and I'm not a lifeguard. In fact, I don't really care about the human race as a whole. But this woman's behavior was too strange. She was a mystery I had to solve. I thought she might be a girl of easy virtue. She was wearing expensive clothes. Maybe they paid her for it. All the way to the car, she bounced around beside me and chatted about how beautiful spring was. She was only about 5'2", so I was looking down at her from above, being almost a foot above her head. She wasn't wearing a bra. She kept throwing flirtatious glances at me. Finally, I said a little more bluntly than I had planned, "Drop it. It's not happening." She looked confused. It was like she didn't know what I was talking about. She asked, "What's not going to happen?" I said, "You know." She obviously didn't know. I opened the door. She jumped in. She said, "Nice car." It's been great. Like I said, I live in an apartment. I make a lot of money and I don't have much to spend it on except for the baby. So renting a Range Rover is not too extravagant. I was driving. She was giving directions. We ended up at an apartment complex in Chevy Chase. She definitely had money. I asked, "What do you do for a living?" She nonchalantly replied, "I'm a lawyer with the FDA." I thought, oh crap. I was glad I didn't blurt out, "So you're not a night butterfly?" Instead, I just stared at her. She added, "Why don't you shut your mouth and come up?" I replied, "Sure, I may be socially retarded, but I'm not stupid." We entered the almost palatial lobby and took an elevator to the top floor that the Willard Hotel downtown would have been proud of. I looked around its corridor like someone who'd never seen a luxury building before. She had a single girl with lots of money look that suggested she had more than just a GS-13 career. I wandered around the apartment touching things. She had beautiful things. She had floor-to-ceiling windows. The view of the emerging dawn was spectacular. She asked, "Would you like a drink?" It was welcoming, not sultry. I said, "I really should get back," and yawned. She said, "Why don't you stay here? Miss Kitty is too sore today, but I shall be ready to hit the road early tomorrow morning." I didn't know how to solve this elephant in the room problem. Hell, it wasn't an elephant. It was a woolly mammoth. I said, "Maybe some other time, but I have to pick up my son in the morning." She replied, "I didn't think so. Are you married?" I told her the whole creepy story. I only left out the part about me being a candidate for a short busload of women. She seemed fascinated. She was a fantastic listener. While I was telling the story, the sun came up. It had been a very long day. Finally, I said, "In 2 hours, I have to pick up Billy in Gaithersburg." She said, "Great, let me get changed, and we'll go pick him up together. Why don't you take a shower to wake up, and we can have breakfast on the way?" I started looking around to see if I had accidentally walked into an episode of The Twilight Zone. I asked in surprise, "You don't even know me, and you want to come with me to pick up my child?" I didn't bother to add that I was a little embarrassed by her attitude. It wasn't like we were buddies. In fact, we didn't even know each other. After what I had just witnessed, I might be all too familiar with her physiology, but I didn't really know her name. I said, "I don't even know your name." She replied, "It's simple. It's Maddie, short for Matilda." I thought her parents must have had an exquisite sense of humor. Then, without missing a beat, she added, "I love kids. We can take him to the Washington Zoo. The pandas are out there now." I didn't react in any way to this proposal. I had the feeling that with this woman, I was in the proverbial creek without a paddle. She may have had some very strange evening practices, but she was a force of nature. What she said made practical sense. Given time, I could drive directly to IHOP from her house. Her toilet looked like it belonged in the Taj Mahal. In fact, the pot gave new meaning to the term throne. I dragged my exhausted ass into her shower, which was the size of my entire bathroom. I was soaping up when the shower door opened, and she appeared behind me. "Let me do it," she said, and began lathering up old Lucifer. The traitorous little friend immediately caught her eye. I turned to face her. She was laughing merrily. There was nothing explicit about what we were doing. It was more like we were having a pillow fight or engaging in some other mischievous teenage fun. She giggled. I held her at arm's length. She looked at me inquisitively, and I kissed her. I couldn't help myself. She was so alive and full of joy. She slapped my hand and said, "We don't have time for this. We have to get your baby." I thought, she's part of the night party, and now she's in charge? I wiped myself down with a towel that must have wiped an entire cotton field. She got ready in her own room. I thought, this woman has serious money. Her contradictions were driving me crazy. The hot shower made my blood pulse again. I was waiting for her in the living room when she reappeared. It was the girl from the neighbor's yard, the one with the pigtails. She was a stunning beauty. I couldn't reconcile the fresh, washed-out look with the queen of the bunch from a few hours ago. The puzzle was getting more and more interesting. We walked back across the hall and out to the car. She grabbed my hand happily and pressed it to her side. It was an act of possessiveness, almost as if she had adopted me as a boyfriend. As we walked across the parking lot, all I could think about were the 5 guys she'd been with last night. There was a struggle going on in my head. I couldn't reconcile my feelings. She should have disgusted me. But instead, I was overwhelmed by the comfortable ease one feels with a longtime friend and companion. She reinforced this thought with her cheerful familiarity. I went to the IHOP in Gaithersburg. I planned to meet my parents there. She wanted to know everything about my baby. I told her that he was an inquisitive 3-year-old. I told her that his mother lost interest in him about 10 minutes after he was born, and it was up to me to take care of his child. I added that the only thing Linda had done in the 8 months before she left was actually breastfeeding, and that was only because she was the only one who had the technology. Billy is a bright boy. He was very happy to see me, and I was even happier to see him. He was sitting on his high chair with a big pile of crackers on his tray. My parents sat together on one side of the booth, waiting for me to arrive. I, along with Maddie, slipped into the house across from them. They looked confused, I realized. Needless to say, they'd never seen me with a woman as attractive as Maddie. At least not one who seemed to have the slightest interest in me. Maddie acted like we always spent Saturdays together. I wondered if I had witnessed another case of the gears slipping. My parents just stared at her, like she was going to apologize and leave as soon as she realized she'd gotten into the wrong booth. Meanwhile, she was already fooling around with Billy. Billy is usually very shy. I expected him to start crying. Instead, he looked puzzled, and then some little switch in his brain's mommy recognition center flipped. He grinned his brightest grin and held out his arms to her. He wanted to be taken in her arms and hugged. Maddie took him in her arms, and the 2 of them smiled and cooed at each other. The other 3 people in the booth looked stunned. I was excited, but I had the composure to say, "Mom and Dad, I want to introduce you to my friend Maddie." She smiled politely at my parents and went back to playing with Billy. She was absolutely wonderful with children. She told me she was like that, but I didn't believe her. I thought, okay, I can see that she's smart enough to be a lawyer. I could see that she's a night butterfly, even if she's too pretty to be used that way. But where does this motherly concern come from? Billy looked like he wanted to go home with her. My son was clearly much faster than his old man, and this at the ripe old age of 3. Of course, Billy didn't have his old man's long track record of failures that would have affected his perception. My parents obviously wanted to know where this vision of beauty came from and what pictures I had so they could blackmail her into being with me. After what I had witnessed last night, I could have taken some pictures, but I didn't get the impression that she was with me for any other reason than she wanted to be there, and she loved my baby. I said as diplomatically as possible, "Maddie and I met at a party last night and decided to take Billy to the DC Zoo to see the pandas." Maddie added, turning sternly to Billy, "Want to see some funny bears?" Billy knows what bears are. He shone like a spotlight. My mom looked at me skeptically. It was something like, "Where did you find this wonderful woman, and how much are you paying her to be with you?" I had the good sense not to tell her I'd run into her last night, when she was dragging a train of guys behind her. Maddie's paradoxes were pissing me off. I had to find out who she really was. So I said, "We should go. Thanks for watching him," and I started to get out of the booth. Both parents said, "No, we want to get to know your new friend better." Maddie gave them a serene smile. I thought, oh my God, she's going to tell them. Maddie says, "Bill and I met at a party last night and hit it off right away. I was hoping we could spend some time today getting to know each other better. He's so deep and interesting." I had 2 thoughts. 1, there is a God. The second was, mine has an incredible sense of irony. The last word I would use to describe myself is interesting. Perhaps I would choose the word deep, since I am as shy as my little boy, and I'm not chatty. People sometimes mistake my silence for deep thinking, not that I'm actually tongue-tied. I try to give everyone a thoughtful look. I said, as aloofly as possible, "Maddie really doesn't know me very well." I could say the same about her. She clearly has a screw loose somewhere. My dad asked, So where do you live and what do you do? Maddie says, I graduated from Harvard and went to Harvard Law School. For the past 6 years, I have been an attorney at the FDA. I specialize in compliance litigation, although I occasionally handle product lawsuits as well. I live in Chevy Chase, but that's because my dad set up a very substantial trust for me. I couldn't afford to live where I live on my government lawyer's salary. My father said with disbelief, resounding in every word. So how did you meet Bill? He's kind of a stay-at-home geek. My parents nodded sympathetically, as if they felt sorry for anyone as misguided as Maddie. My father owned a hardware store. He would never realize that a foam tester was a very highly paid covert specialist. Most of my work was for alphabetized agencies reporting to the Director of National Intelligence, but I also do cases for the military and the State Department. And I'm on speed dial with most of the public relations directors of the big banks. Maddie says, I met him last night. I came with some guys from my golf club. They left me there, and Bill offered to drive me home. He's a real gentleman. I was shocked. The guys she spent the evening with were with her at the golf club? I know enough about guys to know why they dump her. It's a matter of respect for the woman. But I wondered what was going on in Maddie's head. I really didn't want to sit through any more insults. I could have embarrassed myself without my parents' help. And I needed to go away and think about it for a while. So I said, it's a long drive to Rock Creek, and Billy will need a nap, so we better get going. Maddie took Billy in her arms like a veteran mother, and we said goodbye. We walked back to my car, Maddie carrying Billy on her hip. He chatted with her about bears. She looked like she was listening. She buckled him in his car seat. I thought, she's done this before many times. And then she sat down next to me. There was bliss on her face. I said, you weren't kidding. You really love children. She said, I adore children. I want a dozen of them. It was like a revelation. I said, I never asked. Is there someone special in your life that you could spend them with? She replied, maybe you, and gave me a loving look. I had never seen such a look on a woman's face in my life. It was the kind of affectionate, secret smile that a wife might give her husband when she offers him something important. It seemed to be a sincere affection. This concept exploded in my skull like a .22 caliber bullet. I hissed, how can you say that? We don't even know each other. I refrained from adding, and what makes you think I'd have kids with a girl like you? I was in a real predicament. If I had met this woman under any other circumstances, I would have fallen head over heels in love with her by now. She radiated happiness. She was smart, witty, lively, energetic, caring, and attentive to my child. She was also gorgeous. More surprisingly, she seemed to imprint on me in some special duckling manner. That's when most women, even homemakers, check their watches. And this girl was talking about having kids. And to make matters worse, I had never felt so comfortable with another person in my life. The fact that neither of us had gotten any sleep in the last 24 hours just didn't sit right with me. It was like we had been married forever, and were out on a Saturday afternoon with our boy. What was even more perplexing was that Maddie was so beautiful that she could have easily attracted better guys. I am the type of person who lives by Groucho Marx's old phrase, I don't want to be a member of a club that would accept me. However, this woman went out of her way to be with me. I felt like that damn elephant was about to put its tusk in my ass. I wanted to change the subject. I asked conversationally, how do you have such an obvious skill with children? She said, we are Irish Catholics. I am the eldest girl of 7 children. My parents both worked hard, and I had most of the childcare responsibilities as a child. I loved it. I added wryly, didn't you miss out on all the fun as a teenager? I know I'm stupid. I didn't expect her to seriously admit that she was trying to catch up on everything. She says, oh no, I loved raising my younger siblings and watching them develop and learn. I enjoyed watching life through their fresh young eyes. Okay, so she really was Mother Teresa. I gave up. There was no way I could learn anything about her motives using this approach. I tried another way. So you play golf? Are you good at it? I admit it was a little transparent, but I'm not known for subtlety. She replied, oh yeah, I play in 2 different leagues. When I was at Harvard, I played in intercollegiate. She seemed excited that I asked. Things were going so well that I didn't have the heart to ask which of the foursome she'd spent the evenings with last night. I had to cut to the chase. I asked, so what brings you to the party? Do you know Ed Wilson? Ed was the host last night. I know him because we literally did time together. It was for some hacking exploits as teenagers. It was just a few days in the county, and our records were deleted after a couple years. At that point, our paths diverged. I went into commercializing my skills, and Ed went into selling weed. 15 years later, he was still ahead of me financially, but my profession had a longer-term perspective. She asked, puzzled, "No, who is he?" I said, "He's the one who threw the party. Who did you come with?" She said, "I came with Charlie Schneider. He and I worked together at the FDA." I almost said out loud, "I?" She clapped herself on the forehead and said, "Oh yes, now I know who he is. How do you know him?" Charlie told me he supplies most of the weed for the federal government, or at least for the areas where I work. I knew it was an innocent question, but I was seriously on the defensive. I decided that my persistent questioning of her about last night could wait until a more appropriate time. We were crossing the Klingle Valley Bridge. I said, to change the subject, "Look, Billy, there's a zoo." Billy made excited noises as we pulled out of Connecticut into the zoo parking lot. Maddie took him out of his car seat and carried him on her hip all the way to the entrance where we rented a stroller. She had great round hips. There wasn't a man who didn't notice what was in her jeans. From the way she talked to me and Billy, any stranger looking at us would have assumed we were a young married couple on an afternoon trip to the zoo. It was an absolutely marvelous day. She made Billy the happiest boy in the world. I kept up with her. She had a million cute little observations about animals. She balanced her attention to both of us perfectly. Since I love Billy with all my heart, her concern for him was confusing to me. She was so gentle and loving with him that it was hard for me not to fall in love with her. It seemed like a very bad idea, knowing what I knew. However, if there was a more ideal partner out there, I didn't know where to find her. My reasoning was, it doesn't matter how potentially promiscuous she can be in her spare time. What matters is how she makes us feel when we're together. Of course, I also realized that a woman who was so casually and skillfully spending time with 5 strange men would surely break my heart if I let her in. I wanted to ask her if her workmate Charlie was one of the people she was with. I wanted to know how the whole story started, and I really wanted to know what motivated her to do something like that. She was just better than that. Unfortunately, none of that happened. It seemed like she ended every date by dragging a trail of guys behind her, like a peck on the cheek at the door. I didn't think it was a submission or self-perception issue. She was a completely whole person, determined and upbeat. Like sports night was one of the many things she was good at. I thought, maybe this is the explanation and we can move on. At that moment, my little voice snorted contemptuously and said, "You really are a weenie, aren't you?" I decided to abandon all thoughts of my new friend's proclivities and just enjoy our short time together. It would probably be the only day I would spend with her. When we got back to her house, she looked sad. She hesitantly said, "Would you like to come up? I have a few things Billy might like and lots of baby videos for him to watch." I regretfully replied, "No, he's tired and has to sleep in his room." Then I impulsively muttered, "That was one of the best days of my life." I couldn't help myself. It was. She looked hesitant, as if she had been pondering something for a long time. Then she said with misgiving in her voice, "I can come over to your place if you'll give me a minute to pack some things. Tomorrow is Sunday. I can spend the whole day with you if you'd like." An easy choice. I knew I was sure to love it. I said, "I'd love to have you over to my place, but I haven't slept in 30 hours, so it's just going to be a dream." Billy was making impatient noises in the back of the car. He said, "Can Mommy sleep over?" His confusion about who Maddie really was serves as a pathetic commentary on his actual mother's role in his life. The last thing I wanted was to get even deeper into a relationship with this woman. She had seriously gotten under my skin and into my heart. And frankly, I suspected all the circumstances and her motives. But looking at the 2 eager faces in front of me, all I could say was, Maddie can stay with us if she wants. They were both glowing with happiness. I have a nice place. It's not as luxurious as Maddie's, but it's pretty decent. The downstairs is what's called an open floor plan, meaning there are no walls between the front door and the patio doors. I have a small bathroom downstairs, and 2 bedrooms, and a full bath upstairs. Seneca Lake is right off the patio, and I have a 22-foot pontoon boat and a sunfish on a winch on the dock at the foot of the lawn. She was thrilled. Billy had his own room, decorated accordingly. It's sort of a proto-habitat for a 3-year-old macho man. She carried him upstairs, and we stood there while he dressed in his PJs, brushed his teeth, and climbed into bed. She kissed him gently on the forehead. He said in his sweet, boyish voice, "Good night, Mommy." I looked at her. Her eyes were full of tears. I thought, fuck it. I don't care how many gang fights she's been in. This woman is the real deal. We went back downstairs. She looked radiant. I said, "Would you like a drink?" She replied, "No, I'm very sleepy. Can we go to bed?" I said, "Sure. Why don't you sleep there and I'll sleep on the couch?" She looked at me like I was an idiot. She replied, "No, silly, I want to sleep with you." I said, "We're only sleeping, aren't we?" She reiterated, "Only sleep tonight." I started worrying about STDs again. My little voice laughed at me. It said, "Okay, now you're going to hear this story from at least 5 AKC-bred cockhounds, but they have antibiotics for most of these diseases, and if you die of AIDS, it will be worth it." We went upstairs. I slept in my boxers, so I threw off my jeans and shirt and climbed in. She came out of the bathroom in a linen suite. She had long, muscular legs that seemed to stretch 90 feet or so. They were incredible. I already knew what they looked like last night. But it was like listening to the opening notes of Beethoven's Ninth. It still thrills you every time you listen to it. The nightgown was off-white, frilly, and looked modest, though there was nothing underneath. I marveled. She said, "Do you like it?" I wanted to play it cool. I didn't say anything, but the puddle of saliva on my chest probably gave me away. I have a big bed. Linda slept very soundly. She tossed and turned all night like a hunted tuna. So the money I spent to maximize the space between us was worth it. Unless, of course, I wanted to sleep. Maddie made herself comfortable on the bed and pulled herself close to me. As it was, most of the bed was unoccupied. We were lying on our backs, our shoulders touching. She said tentatively, "Good night." I could sense that she was nervous. I impulsively rolled to one side and kissed her gently on the lips. She sighed slightly and then opened herself completely to me. It was just a good night kiss, completely innocent and tender. Yet it was a complete giving of herself. There was not the slightest hint of promiscuity in the kiss itself. But when she kissed me, she was completely and totally there in that moment. I got the feeling that in that moment there was no other person in her world but me. It was like she was affirming her connection. The love kiss was disturbing. It upset me for 2 reasons. First, I had only met her 24 hours ago, and that under circumstances that could diplomatically be called unromantic. I wasn't sure if being intimate with a beautiful and accomplished woman who trains for sport could benefit me. Even worse, the closeness and tenderness of her lips was pulling me into a frightening dark place. I was beginning to feel too comfortable and close to this woman. It was a dangerous situation. After all evidence pointed to a possible emotional catastrophe. With these thoughts in mind, I turned off the light. Then the morning came. I heard my little boy start to move in his room. Maddie was lying almost completely on top of me. One of her arms was thrown across my body. Her bundled head rested under my chin, and one leg was thrown over mine. For such a voluptuous woman, she was light as a feather. I thought, maybe she has hollow bones like a bird. She made rhythmic sighing sounds in her sleep. I carefully crawled out from under her. She stirred and went back to sleep, lying on her back. She looked like Snow White waiting for her prince. I leaned over and kissed her gently on the lips. She woke up like a cat. As soon as her eyes opened, she was fully aware of her surroundings. I stood there almost dressed. I said, "Good morning, sleepyhead. I need to pick up my son. Take your time. I'll make breakfast for us." The thought gave her strength. She said resolutely, "Let's pack it in." She jumped out of bed. Her nightgown had been pulled up as she slept, and the glimpse of a gorgeous leg and taut, muscular sides gave me other thoughts. She pointed. She waved me off and pulled on a Ralph Lauren robe that looked pure cashmere. She said with a laugh, "Later," and we went in together to get the baby. Billy stood up in his new big bed. He said with absolute delight in his voice, "Mommy, you didn't leave," and threw himself into her arms. She wrapped her arms around him, kissing the top of his head. She whispered to him again and again, "I'll never leave you, my little boy." It was a moving testament to Billy's personal suffering. Billy needed his mom. It was really pathetic. I looked at Maddie. She saw the pain in my eyes, and I saw something very disturbing in her eyes. She looked at Billy and me with the same unwavering devotion with which a woman looks at her family. In that moment, she became the most important person in Billy's life. It was as if she had always been Billy's mother and my loving wife. Of course, that wasn't true. And it was problematic. This would have been one of those moments that Kodak captured. That's if I had dated her in high school, married her in college, and made this wonderful baby with her. Then I would have known I could trust her, that she wouldn't betray us. But that's not what happened in reality. Up until that point, she had been an absolutely reliable, commendable friend and companion, as well as a loving and caring caregiver for my son. She was a woman's beginning. She was nurturing and comforting. She was the rock on which our family's happiness rested. We both needed her. If it were just me, I wouldn't hesitate to buy into this fairy tale. I'm a nerd. And because I live mostly in my head, I am relatively immune to harm in the real world. Unfortunately, my little boy had put his love and trust in her. I knew that what I was feeling was most likely an illusion, an artifact of the strange behavior of the woman who was now standing next to me and cradling my child in her arms. But the thing was, I had only met her 2 days ago, and it was in a way that didn't inspire confidence. What it really meant was that I had no idea who this person really was. Logic told me that putting our happiness on the line for her emotional stability was suicide. That conclusion was based on the full set of events from the previous night. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a prude. But in my opinion, women who do it with multiple men is not a good option in the long run. I had to protect my son from the man I saw in that room. The person I had been in contact with since her return from the land of infinite sensation was reliable. She was worthy of our trust in every way. She was in control of the situation. And in that respect, I didn't care at all that in some respect she might have a few monkeys in her attic. I was more than happy to take at face value the loving, caring woman who was now comforting my child. The main problem was that in less than a day we started forming family bonds. I could understand why I do this. I'm impulsive and probably more than stupid when it comes to women and their intrigues. I couldn't understand Maddie's motives. She seemed to want a close relationship, and I was happy to get as close to her as I could. She was the most beautiful woman I'd ever known. But that wasn't the point. Being a single parent is very lonely. There are huge emotional rewards in raising a child. Their unconditional love gives meaning to your own life. But you can't wait to share your child's experiences with the only person who loves them as much as you do. Linda took that away from both of us. And when it comes to loving your child, relying on the instincts of any woman other than a mother is nothing. Maddie held Billy in her arms and rocked him, and he snuggled against her and cried with happiness. My mind drifted past the woman's incredible beauty to the sense of peace and comfort she enveloped us both in. If I could trust her as the person I was dating at that moment, then she was the best thing that had ever happened to me and Billy. If, however, she was a person who did things that fundamentally destroyed herself, then she was a dangerous drug. And the sooner I got rid of her, the better. I was going to bring this discussion to the floor and finalize it today. Meanwhile, I said heartily, "Who wants to ride a horse for breakfast?" We went downstairs and Maddie led the way. My little jockey squealed with delight. I couldn't help but notice how sensually her hips swayed as I rode behind her. She turned left, into the kitchen area, and I headed to the front of the living room. My little boy needed morning cartoons. 5 minutes later, he was sitting there, mesmerized by the adventures of Hiccup and Toothless. I returned to the kitchen, where she was diligently pouring pancake batter onto my griddle. She was creating the perfect Mickey Mouse-shaped pancake. Her frantic concentration on preparing something delicious for Billy made my mood lift. Her thick, dark hair was disheveled. She wore no makeup at all, and her face was gorgeous. It was relatively small. I walked over to observe the work of art she was creating. She looked at me. Then she turned and wrapped her arms around my neck. She pressed her small, firm body against me and gave me the sweetest kiss a wife ever gave her husband at breakfast on a Sunday morning. It said, "Thank you for this moment of peace and contentment." She pulled away, continuing to put her arm around my shoulders. She looked at me intently with her deep, intelligent eyes and asked, "Do you believe in love at first sight?" With all the thoughts in my head at the moment, this question was not something I wanted to do. So I said, "Can we spend the rest of the day discussing this?" She looked disappointed. She clearly wanted to hear a resounding yes. She turned and went back to making a big stack of Mickey Mouse pancakes for us. She looked upset, and for the first time, she didn't radiate the boundless joy I had felt from her almost from the first second we met. Instead, she seemed very sad. I didn't know how to feel about that. She seemed bitterly disappointed by what I thought was a reasonable response. All I said was that I wanted to better understand the emotional state we were both in before making any commitments. When it came to interacting with a woman, it was something of a first time for me. Given the way I was encouraged, at this stage of the relationship, I would have normally pulled out the ring box. Instead, I wanted to have an honest conversation about our motivations and what it all meant for our future. Having deep feelings for someone other than Billy was very dangerous territory for someone who didn't work anywhere like me. But that didn't stop us from enjoying our breakfast. Billy really liked the pancakes. He's a smart boy and immediately understood what shapes are. So we took turns taking bites out of Mickey to create different images. Maddie made Billy laugh by carving eyes and nostrils into his pancake. He carved a big mouth, and I carved a mouth with sharp teeth. Billy wasn't sure he liked my sense of humor. Maddie scolded me for bothering him. She said the way his mother would have said, "You know he's sensitive." Billy decided he liked her a lot more than he liked me. They went back upstairs to get dressed. Maddie came downstairs in simple shorts and a sleeveless tank top that showed off her perfectly muscled legs and stunning breasts. She has such a mature body that it would be difficult for her to dress in something that didn't make her look pleasing to the eye. But in this outfit, she managed to look both modest and enticing at the same time. Her thick blonde hair was tied back with a bandana. It was a sort of suburban housewife's hairstyle. Her perfect face glowed with energy and cheerfulness. She held Billy's hand. He looked at her with pure adoration. I was both delighted and alarmed at the same time. She dressed him in baby shorts, a little polo shirt with alligator on it, and deck shoes. He looked like the fanciest kid in the whole nursery. She kissed me absently on the lips, and we walked out to the back terrace where she was still holding Billy's hand. It felt like we'd been doing this for 10 years. It was a lovely late spring weather day in Maryland. The summer humidity had not yet set in, and the air was soft and warm. Someone was cutting the grass nearby, and you could smell it, as well as the scent of the flowers and the lake. Everything was as peaceful and relaxing as it could be. We were standing on the deck, the three of us holding hands, when a couple from a neighboring condominium approached us. Billy plays with their 2 children. He is just between their boys in age, and my neighbors are used to bringing him over, so the older one doesn't hit his little brother too hard. The wife did a double take. In fact, it was even insulting. She was clearly wondering what a nerd like me was doing with a hottie like Maddie. She addressed Maddie politely and sternly. "Hello, my name is Nancy, and this is my husband Tom. We are William's neighbors. We were wondering if Billy could come over for a little while and play with our boys. We are making dinosaurs out of clay." Tom looked at Maddie surreptitiously, lust written all over his face. Maddie smiled at them both, as if they'd been exchanging recipes for years, and said, "Sure, then maybe we can all go on the boat after lunch. I can make a picnic." She turned to me and said, "Would you like to do this with Bill? I think Billy would like the opportunity to get in the water later." It was the kind of move that a wife would make to her husband, and the only acceptable response to which would be, "Sure, honey." When they left, I said, "Let's go inside." She nodded curtly. Her whole demeanor changed. Until that moment, she had been a loving wife. Now she was a tough government lawyer. I thought, maybe she's a human chameleon. She made us both a cup of coffee. She sat down across from me and looked at me expectantly. I thought, damn, this girl is good. She just put the ball right on my side. I said, "You asked me if I believe in love at first sight." I answered that I wanted to talk about it because the truth is that I have never met anyone like you. I've always been a person who always goes out of my way, and I've learned to regret that behavior. The simple answer is that I believe we have that level of personal intimacy, familiarity, comfort, and affection that is inherent in people in love. All of this happened after only 36 hours, which bothers me. But I can overcome my anxiety if you share the same feelings as I do. You are incredibly beautiful and incredibly attractive. However, that is not what draws me into your orbit. It is the sense of camaraderie I share with you. I have no idea why I feel this strong connection, but it's like we've been married forever. I don't consider myself good enough for a woman of your caliber. I really don't know you, and I have no reason to trust you. But honestly, I feel such a deep connection to you that I would have already proposed marriage if it were just me. The indescribable joy that flashed across her face was tempered by the next thought. She replied, "I don't understand. There is no one but you." I said, "No, it wasn't. Billy's mom walked out of his life when he was 8 months old. He's been pining for his mom ever since she left. If I let you into our lives and things didn't work out, I'd survive. I always do. But losing 2 women he trusted would be a disaster for him. He already loves you." She began to cry softly. I was genuinely puzzled. I said, "What?" She said, "You two have made me happier than I have ever been in my life. You don't realize how lonely it is to be me. Guys either want to lure me or want something from me. To all of them, I am nothing more than my looks, my position, or my wealth. No one has ever asked me what I need or want in life, except you. I knew you had changed as soon as I opened my eyes and saw you sitting here. I also know what the state you found me in looked like. It was exactly what you think it was. I finally recognized that there were no white picket fences for a woman like me, and then you showed up like a genie out of a bottle and granted my every wish." I was completely sober and in control of the situation when Charlie started his infantilizing games. At first, it was just him. Then I realized that all of his friends were in the room. He must have planned it all out before he took me there. He likes to brag about how I'm spending my time. I had never done anything like that before. I was absolutely disgusted with all of them and myself. All I could think about when it started was, if that's how they see me, then I can put up with this program. I was just a doormat to them, and they were men to me. And it doesn't matter what any of you deluded boys think of your precious winks. To all women, a man is just a stick, to paraphrase Shakespeare. I have no idea what was going on in their pea-sized brains when they touched me, but I know what was going on in mine. You have to understand that I wasn't drugged, drunk, or victimized by their male advances. I just lost all hope. I love this business. I can amuse any man to the point of unconsciousness. And now I know I can do it with 5 of them. And my only thought when I came back after 14 bursts of emotion was, is this really it? It was the absolute end of the road for me. I understand that statement very well. I have found myself at the end of the proverbial road many times. And in most cases, the light at the end of the tunnel was ahead of the rushing locomotive. She said, "It was the lowest moment of my life. Then I saw you sitting there. You didn't know anything about me. But you were kind and considerate and caring, no matter what kind of girl you thought I was. And you clearly loved your child. You were everything I was missing in my life." And I couldn't have experienced a greater contrast in the hours that have passed from the moment I finished my little fornication trip to this moment as I sit here with you. I went from debilitating self-loathing to a completely satisfied sense of self-worth and happiness. In many ways, I have become a different person in the past day. My life has found meaning in your world, with you and this little boy. I love you for that with all my heart. I don't want any of that to go away, and I will do anything to keep our budding connection alive. I know it's ridiculous to feel the way I feel in such a short period of time, but deep down, I also know it's the right thing to do. That's what I was talking about when I asked you if you believe in love at first sight. I sat stunned. Sitting here in the breakfast nook, I had a very clear idea of how we'd gotten to this point. It was brutal honesty on her part, but I could really see it. I wasn't born yesterday either. I could accept that a woman like Maddie was a highly skilled and practiced athlete. She was red hot to the core. The kind of passion I'd seen in the bedroom wasn't unusual for her, even if her volume was. It was a fact, and I had to accept it. But she also gave me a compelling reason to trust her future commitment if we were going to build a life together going forward. I also realized why my first impression of her was of her utter helplessness. I still had a hard time accepting that she had humiliated herself, but I could also understand that you do self-destructive and stupid things when you think you've come to the end of the road. From this perspective, I believed that what I witnessed were the actions of a lost soul, opposing its destiny, and nothing more. She followed all the rules. She was a smart and beautiful honor student who touched all the obvious basics without thinking about what it meant for her in the long run. She was gifted athletically. She was an honors student. She had a trophy career. She was a woman of taste and culture and had plenty of money to spend. She was also the most attractive woman in any room. Every man who saw her wanted to meet her, and she loved it. In fact, she was exceptional at it. I knew this firsthand. Every woman worth her salt wanted to be in her shoes, but she was clearly a woman who wanted something different than the life she had carefully constructed for herself. The thing is, she felt unsatisfied. She probably didn't even know why she was so depressed. She probably spent her days thinking, "What did I do wrong? Why am I so unhappy?" It must have seemed distinctly unfair to her. Of course, this was because the life she was living didn't match her true nature. To put things in perspective, she was raised in a large family and was the main helpmate to her siblings. This must have shaped her into someone completely different from the rich, self-centered fool that one would expect from such a beautiful and intelligent girl as Maddie was. Essentially, she wanted meaning and reward in the form of a loving family. And that's what normal people usually want from life, not the high life and lots of anonymous nights out. Actually, it wasn't that hard to believe. As the great American philosopher Dean Martin said, "Everyone needs someone at some point." Her love for her children was obvious without her saying so. I had concrete proof. You can't argue with a 3-year-old when it comes to recognizing a caring woman. That's because 3-year-olds don't yet have the cynic filter installed. And when Maddie and Billy were together, he relentlessly took advantage of every mommy opportunity. He had no doubt what kind of person she was. Moreover, even though they both worked, her mother and father must have maintained a close relationship. She had to learn friendship from someone. She was good at all those gestures of affection that a woman uses to show a man that they are living the same life. And I don't think the FDA has a drug for that yet. You may say, yes, of course it's all an act. But if it is, then the obvious question becomes, why me? I think I was just in the right place when she found herself at the end of the road. And my particular style of routine matched her needs at that moment. The fact is, everyone has to be lucky at least once in their life. I'm pretty sure I don't possess any of the characteristics of the men who usually populate her world. I'm not rich, successful, or particularly handsome. But I am honest and forthright, and I lead a relatively simple and fulfilling life with a wonderful child. Moreover, I actively avoided trying to get into her pants, which must have been a first for her. It wasn't done for any moralizing. I'm just as excited as the other guy. I was just afraid of what would happen if I did it. Sometimes not being cool enough takes its toll. So I guess I understand why she sat at my kitchen table on a gorgeous Sunday afternoon and looked at me with fear and anticipation. I said as casually as possible, "I share your feelings unconditionally." The expression of relief and happiness on her beautiful face is one I would like to keep until I am very old. I added, "I know everything that's going on between us is true, but we have a lot of catching up to do, because if you look at it from a practical point of view, we are much further along in our feelings for each other than any sane person could be after only 36 hours. And if you want to be with us, you're going to have to change your lifestyle, and in the short term, because I would never rip Billy out of the life he knows. He's too fragile for that kind of change right now." Maddie reached across the table and took my hand in both of her delicate little hands. She brought it to her lips and kissed it. Then, something changed in her eyes. It was the most sizzling look I had ever gotten from a woman. I thought, "Uh-oh, that fire is burning very hot," she said. "On your deathbed, you won't regret committing yourself to me. Together, we will do whatever it takes to live a happy life together. I will never change a single part of Billy's life, but he will have to get used to being the oldest boy in the company of the other siblings. I plan to make for both of you." At that moment, she stood up, lifting me to my feet. She threw her arms around my shoulders and grabbed the back of my head. Her kiss made steam come out of my ears like one of those old-fashioned cartoon characters. Love at first sight. Chapter 2. Then, surprisingly, she began to hyperventilate loudly. She groaned convulsively and literally collapsed. It was as if her legs suddenly gave out. I picked her up and pulled her against me. She gave a rhythmic, shuddering cry. It amazed me. It was the hottest display of female beauty I'd ever witnessed. I held her tightly to my chest as she came back to me. She was looking at me with a concerned expression on her face. She said, puzzled and a little scared, "What did you just do to me?" I said quite sincerely, "Did I kiss you?" She replied, "Nothing like this has ever happened to me before." I said with complete conviction, "Obviously, so did I." That was our connection. I felt it too. She stood staring at me with huge eyes. She seemed hypnotized. She said, "I can't imagine what will happen to me when we spend time together in the bedroom." The goofy-looking Maddie lingered a moment longer, and then the energetic and witty Maddie returned. She clapped me on the arm and said with a laugh, "You've had enough. We have to get Billy." We spent the rest of the day at Seneca Lake with Tom, Nancy, and the 3 boys. It was idyllic. I kept waiting for her to turn back into who she really was, but she continued unconcernedly in her horribly unnatural guise as my favorite woman. Nancy and she spent the afternoon good-naturedly teasing both of us about our many male failings. Only a longtime wife and mistress could get away with that without damaging her feelings. But Maddie handled it like an experienced married woman. We seemed to be together all the years of Billy's life. And my neighbors were our old friends. The unobtrusive feigned closeness was a result of the affection Maddie radiated toward us. It was obvious that Nancy was puzzled. Nancy looked good, but she was out of Maddie's league and she knew it. She couldn't understand what such an attractive woman was doing to me. It wasn't such a strange question, since that's exactly what was going through my head. Tom's thoughts were a little more obvious. He looked longingly at Maddie as she motherly leaned over to talk to the children. He kept throwing looks at me that were more like, "I don't know how you did it, but you're a lucky dog." Maddie also gave Billy a sense of acceptance that helped him open up to everyone. I know that part of my attraction to her is that I am a ready-made family. Billy is a bright, albeit somewhat nerdy boy, and his serious arguments about the advantages of Triceratops over Stegosaurus were absolutely invaluable to the 4 adults. Maddie was glowing with love and pride. It was hard to believe that she had met him only the day before. Perhaps I first encountered her as the star of the movie cluster. And maybe I really don't know this woman. But one thing was certain. It was that Maddie loved Billy. We grilled steaks and drank beer on a warm spring evening. I honestly didn't know what the future held. There was a 50-50 chance that tomorrow she would come to her senses and realize how ordinary and boring my life was. And then she would run screaming back to her luxurious home and her fast-paced life. But I also know that a lot of my problems stem from thinking too much. What I knew for sure was that she gave me a sense of purpose that I had never experienced before. I realized for the first time that a good woman in your life makes you a much stronger and more capable man. She made me strive for success to justify the faith she put in me. I've decided. This one would probably break my heart, but I was going to do everything I could for her. I knew that deciding to marry this woman as soon as possible was either a very brave decision that Billy and I would benefit from for the rest of our lives, or it was either the stupidest, most selfish and naive idea that had ever crossed my mind. However, I also knew it was coming. Only time will tell. The little woman sleeping next to me is smart, funny, driven, and just plain stunning. She was a star. Perhaps you can see why I'm a little concerned? We bonded over the strangest weekend imaginable. She went from a minx on Friday to an extraordinary life partner by Sunday night. In those 48 hours, she made my little boy happier than he had ever been in his life. And she almost killed his daddy. Maddie is the most beautiful girl I've ever known. There are no boundaries or limits for her. She is always ready to tell you what she wants, often in urgent and very explicit terms. She is generous and yet completely consumed by her own hunger. Her body is magnificent. Her technique is honed. Her stamina is limitless. You don't have to say it. I know what her world-class beauty implies. I'm not that naive, and I certainly don't believe in unexplained luck. But unfortunately, you can't have both. Women like Maddie are a major paradox for guys. We want a super beautiful woman. And then we realize what all that hotness does to the rest of the male population, which in turn causes mild irritation to the one lucky enough to be her man. It's not that Maddie and I don't look good together. It's that it's like we met when I pulled her pigtails in 3rd grade. In fact, I met her 6 months ago, when she was having a masterful time with 5 very handsome yuppies. Truth be told, I'm an unremarkable nerd, especially when it comes to savvy. These guys were way outside my code on the coolness factor, yet in the 8 months we've been living together, I haven't had the slightest hint that Maddie wants to switch. She called it love at first sight. All I know is that the Monday after we met, she just showed up on my doorstep with all her stuff. She never came back. Now she was snuggled up to me with a look of complete satisfaction on her face. She said she wanted to live an unpretentious life. If that's true, I can see why she's with me. I'm the king of casual, but I wish I could believe her motives. She told me over and over that it was my complete lack of style that made her want to be with me. I wasn't flattered by her assessment, but I had to agree. I completely lacked personal cool. The only trump card I have up my sleeve is her love for her children. I know for a fact that her love for my child is genuine. No one could have behaved as consistently, with as much love as she has, and for as long as she has, without letting this cat out of the bag. She only thinks about what's best for Billy. She has made his life full and interesting. With Maddie's help, Billy has grown from a shy boy to a strong and confident 4-year-old. Needless to say, he idolizes her the way only a child can love his mother, which is more than ironic, since Billy doesn't know his real mother. She left us to marry some politician from Washington when he was 8 months old and never looked back. Needless to say, if Maddie moved in with us, we would have to merge our households. I owned my place outright, and Maddie seemed to have more money than she could spend. So we did a lot of planning to find the best long-term living arrangement. Neither Maddie nor I wanted to change Billy's life, at least not until he was used to her presence. Perhaps it was an unnecessary precaution. Billy would have been happy living in a yurt on the steppes of Outer Mongolia as long as Maddie was with him. We argued and went shopping. Billy went with us to all the real estate deals. He had full veto power. Maddie kept an eye on it. Eventually, we settled on a beautiful place in Georgetown. It was on the Palisades west of the university, and it was easy to get to everything nearby. I sold my condo. I bought it with cash during the recession and got a lot of money from the subsequent sale. So I had a very large down payment on a new home. I took full responsibility for the purchase. Maddie was so far above me socially that I wanted to show her that I could make some big boy moves myself. Maddie was renting her apartment to some pompous State Department dude. She said she was making a fortune in rent. Maybe being a high-ranking Harvard lawyer helped her negotiate. Commuting to work hasn't been a problem. I mostly work from home, and Maddie quit her job the day I moved in. She said she was just doing FDA because she had nothing better to do. Now that she had Billy to take her to all the cool, kid-friendly places in DC, she said that's what she really wanted to do. We went everywhere: museums, stores, and playgrounds. I had never seen a woman so realized. It was eerily unsettling. I've learned to live with the mystery that is Maddie, but I've never been able to solve it. Every time I try to get to the bottom of her motives, I am met with a "what kind of idiot are you?" attitude. It repulses me, as if the answer should be obvious. Maybe to her it is, but what's going on in that maze she calls her mind is definitely not clear to me. If she hadn't been so single-minded, I would have understood why she gave up everything to pursue motherhood as if it were a calling. But she walked away from a fast-paced legal career as if it had no value to her. With that, she probably set the cause of women lawyers back half a century. Highly accomplished women lawyers are supposed to aspire to kick ass and take charge, not carry children. I was listening when she told her boss she was quitting. Her boss was Charlie Schneider. I thought with horror, she did this to her boss? This led to an even more exciting thought. I wonder if any of the other 4 guys on that train were co-workers. That's the kind of thing you're better off not thinking about. Unless, of course, you want to keep your sanity. I heard, "Hi, Charlie, it's Maddie. No, it's okay. I made it home. No, seriously, there's no problem. Listen, I'm going to send you a digitally signed message about my termination as of today." What? Don't scream. What's wrong with you? No, this has nothing to do with you and me or last weekend. I just want to take a different direction in my life. I don't care what it does to my legal career. You know I don't need the money. Seriously, you're being a jerk. If you try that, you'll find out how much better a lawyer I am than you." Then she slammed the receiver down and muttered to herself, "What's gotten into me?" We had been together for 2.5 months when she announced she was pregnant. Maddie's pregnancy was one of the most sublime and shocking experiences imaginable. First of all, she was happy, as no woman has a right to be happy. She was radiant. Every night, he and Billy would talk to his sister. By then, we knew it was going to be a girl. Billy would tell her about his day and then kiss her baby bump at night. Of course, since the countdown was still going from T-5 months, sister might have been a bit of an abstraction to Billy. But Maddie insisted that baby Chelsea, we'd already picked out her name, was the person Billy should get to know and love. That turned out to be very wise. Billy treated the upcoming birth as if he were getting a new puppy. I was shocked when she announced she was expecting a baby. One could be forgiven if I hadn't once asked a woman about birth control. If I had made the same mistake twice, I would have won a Guinness Award. Then I plucked up courage and asked her to marry me. She laughed at me. I said, "What? Don't you want her to have a father?" She replied, "That's not the point. It's just that the 19th century called and left you a message. They said you were no longer obliged to act honorably." I replied, "What if I want to marry you?" It seemed to bother her. She always radiates happiness. The disturbance in the force was obvious. My little voice turned away, threw up its hands and said, "I knew it." She said, "I love you with all my heart and we have the perfect life together. I don't want anything to change that. So, yes, I am afraid to marry you. I'm afraid we'll go the way of all married couples, and I don't want that. I want things to always be fresh and open between us." It was such a formulaic response that I had to throw out the bullshit checkbox. I said with more bitterness in my voice than I intended, "Are you sure your hesitation isn't due to the fact that you're waiting for a better offer?" Her eyes flashed. She asked, "What the hell do you mean?" I said, "What I just said. I know you can switch with me with one phone call. Is that the reason you don't want to marry me?" She said with cold anger in her voice, "This is ridiculous. For the first time in my life, at least since I left home for Harvard, I am unequivocally content. I'm happy living with you and having your children, but I don't want the way we are together to ever change. I've been around men my whole life, and honestly, things start to fall apart when we start talking about commitment. I know what you're thinking, and yes, I can get any man, and no, you're not Mr. Perfect, but neither am I. I will be 30 years old this February, and at the time I met you, I was sick to death of the politics between man and woman. No man has ever treated me with as much respect as you have. Their only goal is to use me or use me to advance their own careers. You, on the other hand, treat me like a confidant and best friend. You give me true happiness and are the perfect father. Where we are on the social ladder is completely irrelevant to me. I've proven to myself that I can succeed in a man's world, and I might want to go back someday, just to keep my head up. But I've never wanted anything more than a family and a happy home. That's what I'm going to get with you." Another cliché, and my little voice wondered, does this woman really exist? Keeping that special bond I have with you and Billy is my highest priority. When I'm around you, I feel on top of my game. I'm accepted for who I am, and I'm content with that kind of life. I'd be crazy to want to change anything about my current situation. However, if you promise me that the easy friendship we have now will never fade, I will marry you in a heartbeat. But I have one condition. We must always trust each other. If you can't do that, I want to end the loss right here and now. I've invested too much in what we have, and I can't bear the thought that it was all just my personal fantasy. I didn't think about any of what she had just said. As usual, my male ego has blinded me. You tend to forget that a woman as beautiful as Maddie has as many human frailties as you do, and that she has her own fears and insecurities. The thing is, I didn't know anything about her life before I met her, and it had never occurred to me that a woman as stunningly attractive as Maddie could suffer from insecurity. Of course, only someone as simple-minded as me could fail to see that Maddie was facing her own problems. She's such a strong, independent soul that I couldn't imagine how anything bad could have happened to her in the past. In her case, I can always invoke the male exception. We are not the most sensitive creatures. Dogs are, men are not. In that moment, a lot of things fell into place. I said, I can learn to live with the fact that every man turns his head when you walk into a room. I can learn to live with all the hidden longing you cause in our species. I think I can also learn to live with the fact that you are above me on the social ladder, but I can't stop asking myself, why me? Why do I deserve such a wonderful woman? I know I'm insecure. Any guy would be confident with a woman like you. You have to be realistic. In a man's world, you're a trophy, a prize. If I were a rich and famous movie star, I'd understand why you're with me. But since I'm not, I carry a lot of insecurity about our long-term prospects. I know insecurity is a sign of weakness, but I never claimed to be a cowboy. I even understand that you are attracted to me for the simple and fulfilling life I offer, but I'm afraid that someone cooler and higher up will steal you away from me. Won't there come a time when you'll want the same old excitement? Booze, endless parties, new men? She looked at me like I was crazy. For the first time, I saw real concern in her eyes. She looked almost frightened. From the moment I'd met her, she'd treated me as if there were some self-evident things in our relationship that I just hadn't realized yet. It was as if she saw something I didn't. Now she was looking at me as if she had made a mistake, and there was really nothing there. I didn't understand her strange reaction. To allay her fears, I said, I know what you're thinking. And yes, I feel the same deep connection between us. I just wanted to say that I just don't know why. She looked at me with relief, laughed and said, You think too much. Someday you'll realize it. Then I met her family. This event made me pay attention to many things. She was born and raised in a small Michigan town and wanted her wedding to take place there. It didn't matter to me where we got married. I would have married her in the middle of the Sahara Desert. So the next week, Billy, Maddie and I flew to the Detroit airport, rented a car and drove 25 miles to her parents' house in Ann Arbor. The wedding was supposed to be a civil wedding, but we still had to wait 3 days after receiving the license. Maddie has several useful images besides loving mother, excellent companion, and the world's most beautiful ass. One of them is a tough Harvard-educated lawyer. She's the reason we got our license. Her mom was a professor at the University of Michigan, which is located there. Her father held a high position in the scientific community. Her 2 sisters still lived in their house, which was as close to the castle as any place I had ever been. It was on a ridge overlooking the Huron River, and its grounds were not just lawns, but actual grounds. I scratched my head in amazement, wondering if Robin Hood and his merry band of men were lurking in the vast forest. She told me to stop gawking. It was embarrassing. I should have known she had roots like that. My dad owns a hardware store, and my mom raised the kids. I was frightened, to say the least. Her household simply enveloped her with love. The pervasive atmosphere of happy and peaceful domesticity filled in many gaps and answered most questions about why she held such family values. In that moment, she changed again, from a confident woman to an older daughter. In many ways, the actions associated with this role were the same ones she played with me, loving and obedient. But her parents made her possessive. Their interrogations did not include water torture, but it was clear that they were following an alternative scenario. In their scenario, Maddie went through several levels of achievement in the legal field until she became a judge and then a member of the Supreme Court. Now she stood in front of them and said she wanted to change the course of events. She actually wanted to live with me and raise the kids. This was an interesting reversal from my blue-collar universe. In my world, a common plot in relationships with daughters is the desire for marriage and children. But these were high-ranking WASPs, both with doctoral degrees. Naturally, their attitude toward the idea expressed contempt. I could see that Maddie's parents were so opposed to her marriage that our appearance on their doorstep almost resulted in Billy and me being banished. The fact that their daughter was visibly pregnant, and I was the sole culprit, only made it worse. Needless to say, they were not happy. I had to wave my red cape in front of the bull. We exchanged the usual pleasantries. Then she and her parents and I sat down to lunch to talk turkey. That we were served lunch by caterers or servants or whoever did not go unnoticed to me. Her father said with genuine, contrived joy, "So how did you and Maddie meet?" An honest answer to that question would have ended the conversation right there on the spot. and probably would have gotten my future wife sent to a convent because of it. Instead, I said, "We met at a party in Falls Church. Afterward, I gave her a ride home. The people she came with abandoned her." I left the reason for leaving to their imagination, confident that they would never come up with an actual reason. I added, "We bonded over the weekend. She gets on really well with my son, and it felt so right." Both parents looked like they didn't believe a word of it. Their demeanor suggested that our encounter involved a white van, drugs, and a bag over their heads, and that Maddie couldn't get her phone out fast enough to stop the kidnapping. The problem is that this explanation seemed much more plausible to me. Her mother said, continuing her contrived sociability, "So what do you do? Whoever won Maddie's heart should be a star in the Washington skyline." I said, "I'm a freelance pen tester. I hack into people's computers and tell them how I did it." I realized that in their opinion, I had just declared that I was a borderline criminal. I was starting to get a little tired of all these judgments. Her father said with more gruffness in his voice than perhaps he intended, "Doesn't sound like a career. Where did you learn how to do that?" Truth be told, no responsible school would teach what I know. So instead, I casually said, "Oh, I didn't go to college." That's because even before I reached drinking age, I was earning over 6 figures a year. But Mr. and Mrs. Bigshot PhD didn't need to know that. I also didn't bother to tell him that I was on speed dial with most of the heads of major corporations and knew the top cyber guys at the agency and on the farm. That would have made it too easy for them. Maddie looked at me like she wanted to take me outside and beat the shit out of me for acting like an ass with her parents. She knew exactly what I was up to and why. It seemed to me that they didn't show her the respect she deserved. She was an intelligent and balanced woman who made a choice about what she wanted in life. Her parents should have honored her. It was her I loved, not them. I was surprised to find myself using the word love in my imagination. She would probably end up breaking my heart, but she was the only person besides Billy I'd ever let into the house. At this point, the interrogation was interrupted. Her mother said brightly, as if she was about to lose her temper, "When is Maddie going to give birth?" Maddie gave her the enigmatic smile last seen on the Sistine Madonna and said, "Little Chelsea will become part of our lives in early September. We can't wait for her to join us. I want to have 4 more." I thought her mother would faint at the sensation. Maddie made this statement nonchalantly, as if discussing sightseeing plans. Perhaps Maddie was a little tired of her parents' attitude too. They withdrew. A furious conversation and several raised voices were heard in the house. About half an hour later, Maddie's younger sister Millie appeared on the terrace. Millie is short for Millicent. Maddie's full name is Matilda. This led me to believe that Maddie's parents either have an exquisite sense of humor or are the most pretentious people on the planet. We both looked at her expectantly. Millie is like a younger, slimmer, and slightly taller version of Maddie, just as smart. She said this with some irritation in her voice. "They want to throw a party tomorrow night in honor of your marriage." "I don't understand. I told them you could do it after the wedding, but they insist on doing it before." I get it, in case Millie didn't. They hoped to illustrate to Maddie all the things she would give up if they did disown her. We both smiled at Millie and said with fake enthusiasm, "That sounds wonderful." Maddie is a very smart woman. She figured it out too. Millie grinned and said, "The guests of honor are ordered to report tomorrow night at 7:30 sharp. Why don't you two take one of the cars, and Maddie will show you around town. I'd like to keep Billy if you don't mind. He's so cute, and Mary and I want to play with him." Mary was the next youngest after Millie. Her real name was Mirabelle, but no one called her that. All 3 girls in this family loved children equally, and Billy had already accepted them as aunts. They wanted to take him to the pony farm, north of this place. We spent a perfect day and a half exploring the neighborhoods of Ann Arbor. I knew about the university, of course, but there were a million enjoyable experiences in such an expensive city. I was particularly interested in the area around the farmers' market. I wondered what happened to the hippies of the 1960s. It was interesting to see that now they all drive Mercedes as men. We were at her castle, getting ready for the party, at 6:30 the next day. I hesitate to call Maddie's family home. Her parents were very upset when Maddie insisted that all 3 of us sleep in the same room. I'd be ready to sleep alone in my bedroom and Billy on the floor in a sleeping bag. It was our usual way of traveling. The problem arose when Maddie insisted on sleeping with us. This caused some old-fashioned resentment. Apparently, in this house, unmarried people didn't sleep in the same room. It made me wonder if they had really already made the connection between me and her potbelly. Maddie was already dressing Billy. He was dressed in something more stylish than the Kennedy offspring. Downstairs, he was playing croquet with Millie and Mary. Maddie paced around the room in her bra and thong, trying to decide which classic little black dress to wear. She's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in the flesh. And when I was young, I used to hang out on the beaches of South Florida. There isn't an ounce of fat on her 5 feet 2 inches, but her wide hips make it seem like she's more massive than she really is. It's only when you see her without a single stitch that you realize what a perfect hourglass figure she has. Her body is absolutely taut. The muscles beneath the silky smooth skin are toned and don't look exhausted, but her real glory is her legs. She's been a lifelong dancer, and her legs are nothing like the typical skinny female legs. They are fully muscular and perfectly developed, and her calf muscles stand out like little cannonballs when she wears regular heels. She was wearing the same thigh-length black stockings she'd worn the night I'd met her. Of course, that and a pair of patent leather shoes were all she was wearing during that meeting. And those gorgeous legs were straddled by several guys. Half naked, Maddie was too much, so I grabbed her and kissed her. She opened up to me the way she had since our first kiss. When we kiss, she's completely immersed in another world with me. She burns a little hotter than most mortals. We may be talking fractions of a degree, but when you kiss her, she is literally red hot. The same can be said for the other end of her. She pressed herself against me. I guided her back to the bed as she started to tear at my belt. She broke the kiss when the backs of her legs hit the bed. She turned suddenly, put both hands on the mattress, and lifted her ass. She whispered furiously, "Do it." When she's in that mood, she's hard to say no to. So I adjusted my bayonets and even muttered, "Charge," under my breath. It's as amazing as kissing. She must have been thinking about me the last couple days. She let out a muffled growl and pushed back hard. Then she hissed, "I'm almost done," and thrust her hips hard, and I left her shaking face forward on the bed. Needless to say, I must have changed the atmospheric pressure in it. She was lying so that I was on her back like a rag. She was panting as if she'd run a record-breaking 100 meters. We were like that for a minute. Then she turned under me. She threw me an almost panicked look and said, "Promise me that this will never change, that you will always be mine, and I will always be yours, that nothing will ever happen between us." She hesitated and said even more emphatically, "Promise me." It was as if she had a premonition of things to come. Hello, viewer. I could cut the story short here and say that the full version is on Patreon, but I'm not an asshole to do that to you, so I'll just remind you that many scenes of a vulgar nature have been cut or censored, and you can always find them on our Patreon. Thank you to those who have already joined us, and now continuing our narrative. I grinned and said, "That's the easiest promise I've ever made. You are my perfect woman, and I will do anything to keep you in my life." Funny how life changes for the better in a few short hours. I remembered that promise with bitter anger a little later in the evening. I got dressed before Maddie did. She's been working on my closet since we've been together. Now I look much more like a resident of Harvard Yard than a resident of Laytonsville, Maryland. However, medical fact states that it can be dangerous to the male's health if he hangs around while the female prepares for presentation. So I went to the party. Her sisters grabbed me and took me to where Billy was. Millie is still young enough to have all the cool kid games on her computer, and that's where Billy was before Millie put him to bed in our room. But I was allowed to see him before Millie took him upstairs. Billy is Maddie's pride and joy. She treated him like her own son from the moment she saw him. Her sisters had adopted him overnight, and they were in no mood to put up with silly arguments about who was really his parent. That speaks to Maddie's feminine sensibilities. And in the last 6 months, she spent a lot of money on his social development. As a result, he went from a hurt, almost frightened boy in public. He has changed from a wounded, almost frightened boy into a child who is very sociable and at ease among people. He was earnestly talking about dinosaurs to a small group of amused adults. His face lit up when he saw me and he ran over to give me a hug. I kissed his cheek and asked, "How's the pony?" He said, "Daddy, they were fascinating." I thought, what 4-year-old uses the word fascinating to describe his day? Then Maddie appeared on the steps. She was breathtaking. She was wearing one of those traditional cashmere little black dresses with a simple string of pearls. But that classic oval face and that spectacular body made her look like Cinderella at the ball. Her huge, intelligent hazel eyes were framed by her beautiful russet hair, like a curtain on the stage of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She has amazingly clear, swarthy skin, which she showed off by exposing her shoulders and going down to the deep neckline of her dress. She lifted the girls to stun, and they swayed delightfully as she walked. But the main attraction was the magnificent muscular legs of the dancers in their black dresses. The whole room froze and watched her serenely and gracefully descend on her 4-inch heels. She glowed with a special blend of happiness and beauty. I was proud of her. She was mine and no one else's. As soon as she saw me, she immediately declared her love for me. Her face lit up and she walked toward me, keeping her eyes on me. She took my hand and pressed it against her magnificent breasts. She said to me, as if she were dressing just for me, "Do you like it, my love?" I looked at her in awe and said softly, "I like it." Her parents instantly destroyed that special moment. They swooped down on us like a pair of hungry vultures. Then they dragged us around the room to introduce us to each of Maddie's friends. During this tour, they made it clear that they were introducing me to her real peers. I realized what they were getting at. None of these people were even remotely like me. The herd of pretty princesses and college Joes was endless. They were polite to the peasantry. Nobility required them to be polite. Some even seemed friendly. They had one thing in common: excellent genes and good upbringing. They also had money and status. Maddie's old friend, who turned out to be the least friendly, was a Tom Cruise look-alike named Chad. My little voice said wryly, "Seriously, Chad?" He was shorter than me in height, but much heavier. I got the impression that he had been training hard. He was dressed in traditional preppy clothes: blue blazer, white cotton shirt, rep tie, and khaki pants, sneakers, and no socks. He had that easy swagger and assumed superiority that distinguished their kind. His perfect white teeth gleamed as he shook my hand. He made it clear that he thought Maddie was crazy. Both parents did not fail to inform me that Maddie and Chad were a couple throughout prep school. They also hinted that Maddie had handed him her cherry. They told me that they graduated from Harvard together. Maddie went to law school and Chip went to Harvard Business School. He lived in Omaha like no other place. This was because he was a rising star in a small firm called Berkshire Hathaway. I realized that Chad's unfriendliness was mostly due to the fact that he had unrequited love for Maddie. This conclusion was drawn from the fact that he met her with such a combination of melancholy, lostness, boredom, and lust that I wanted to throw up. Maddie reacted to it about the same way you would react if a 12-foot diamondback rattlesnake jumped out in front of you. She gasped, and I could see the genuine fright in her eyes. Her dramatic reaction was puzzled, to say the least. I haven't had a chance to think about it further. All because it was at this point that her father, like a professional, took me out of the herd. It was as if he wanted to create some kind of space for two old lovers to indulge in memories. He wrapped me in a hug and said, "How about trying a real Cuban Bills?" Then he dragged me into the wood-paneled library where I looked around, trying to see if Ulysses Grant and J.P. Morgan were going to join us for an after-dinner cigar. There were 4 other older men in the room, all drinking Johnny Walker Blue at $500 a bottle. Her father handed me a real Cohiba and 3 fingers. I get it. He was having the obligatory man-to-man conversation with his new son-in-law. I had to admit it was all very interesting, and the cigar and whiskey were priceless. I sat there for hours, fending off questions about what I do for a living. The old guys were a driving force in the defense community, and friends of Maddie's dad. Most were from NASA, but there was one DISA administrator who fell into the realm of my special little universe. So I hinted to him that I was much more than Maddie's father had imagined. The expression of intelligent understanding in his eyes was gratifying. I had a feeling he would bring Pops up to speed as soon as I left the room. The party was still going on when I got back to her. Maddie was on the dance floor, caught in Chad's predatory embrace. It was a real surprise. I got the impression that she feared and hated him at the same time. What had changed in the 2 hours her father had held me captive? I'm the kind of guy who absolutely will not stand by while someone else is having an affair with his woman. So I walked straight across the floor and cut in. Chad looked pissed. Maddie looked pissed. I thought, what the fuck? One night might not hurt the baby, but I gather she didn't want to drink at all during her pregnancy? Maddie looked at me dumbfounded. As if not recognizing me, giggled and said, "I'm drunk." I said with some irritation in my voice, "I can see that. How did that happen?" For a second, she looked puzzled. Then she said, "I don't know. Maybe I only had one glass?" Then she hiccuped, added embarrassed, "I remember that," and giggled some more. At this point, one of Maddie's friends cut in on her, and I found myself dancing with someone else. It seemed like it was all choreographed. I was taken away quickly. Chad approached Maddie again. He pulled her into an embrace that could only be described as intimate, both arms around her, both palms on her ass. She had her head down on his shoulder and looked completely out of it. I was disgusted. The song is over. The next song started. I went back in there to interrupt it all again. But instead, I found another preppy princess standing eagerly in front of me. I was sure that the reason for the interest of all these well-meaning women was not my destructive charm. It was like an underhanded game, organized on Maddie's behalf. My new partner took me dancing to the far end of the room. At that moment, I lost sight of Maddie. The new girl was so blue-blooded that I wondered if she had come in a carriage with a foursome. As she and I danced, she told me about the insanely passionate affair Maddie and Mr. Chad had when they were in college. Apparently, everyone in their group just assumed they would get married when they graduated high school. But Maddie caught Mr. Chad serial cheating. Then, to make matters worse, he came over to her house one night, just to talk, and ended up using her. Her friend added, "At least that's what she claimed. Of course, it was her word against Chad's, so we didn't know who to believe. We talked her out of filing a police report. If she had done that to Chad, it would have really hurt his career." I thought, some friend. The song ended, and I went in search of Maddie again. This time there were no stray aristocrats interfering with my search. It was a little unsettling. Maybe I'd lost all my charm. Maybe something else was going on. I looked all around the dance floor, but Maddie wasn't there. There were yuppies of all shapes and sizes. But I also didn't see that freak Chad. I smelled a well-groomed 200-pound rat. There were about 10 million rooms in her house, and if I didn't go from room to room on every floor, I'd have no luck finding them. I was getting seriously worried. Maddie was too drunk to be alone. Then I ran into Mary. She's bigger and taller than Maddie. She also has probably the biggest bust in the history of the Ann Arbor community. If Maddie is the Rocky Mountains, Mary is the Himalayas. They were squeezed into her little black dress. I said, "Have you seen Maddie?" She said, "The last time I saw her, she was walking outside with Chad." And she pointed toward the patio doors. I thanked her and went out to the patio. It was summer warm outside and very dark as soon as you got away from the light of the house lights. I saw a few people standing on the lawn and went in their direction, but I didn't recognize any of them. I noticed movement in the small ornamental gazebo to my left, toward the river. I hesitantly wandered in that direction. I honestly thought, maybe they're out there admiring the river in the moonlight. I know I'm stupid, but the alternative was too painful to contemplate. A well-maintained path led through the trees. It was paved with cedar shavings. No one could hear me approaching. However, I didn't really need to be silent. I could have climbed the elephant while playing the trombone. The two occupants of this small building would never have noticed me. Love at first sight. Chapter 3. I heard a loud groan, followed by a prolonged moan. Then there was a liquid sound. Maddie was lying on one of the expensive outdoor couches, with her arm over her eyes and the other resting on her side. Her little black dress was pulled up and the top rolled down while her lover occupied her. Her powerful legs wrapped around Mr. Chad and she wriggled on the couch cushions. She was almost crying with need. She shouted again and again, "That's it! That feels so good!" Then she started kicking furiously. As I quickly made my way back the way I had come, I heard a loud "ah" from her partner and a tempestuous "oh yes" from herself. I guess I should have seen it coming. She really was too far away from me, but still, the pain was unimaginable. Death would have been far preferable for me. I must have looked the way I felt when I returned to this godforsaken ballroom. Mary hurried over to me, concerned. Maddie had only been gone for about 30 minutes, but she was already organizing her own search party. I said with utter defeat in my voice, "They're over there in the gazebo." She rushed out the door in a panic, bringing 2 of the friendlier men with her. I had no idea what I was going to do next. With any other woman before Maddie, I would have just packed up, left in a rental car, and never looked back. But of course, there was Billy. He was a major complication. It was exactly what I was afraid of. And it was exactly what I wanted to avoid at all costs. I couldn't suddenly take Billy away in the middle of the night without serious emotional repercussions. So I had to talk Maddie into somehow sending us off like nothing had happened. She owed it to both of us. I don't run away from fights, never have, and never will. I walked away from this disgusting encounter earlier because I didn't want to disrupt Maddie's special moment with this asshole. I wasn't going to be the weenie begging my woman to tell me why. The reasons were painfully obvious. She had finally reunited with her former lover. I thought, her parents are behind this. They must have set the whole thing up, and Maddie must have enlisted her friends to keep me busy while they strengthened their bond. It seemed to me that it would take a lot of effort to get rid of me. I thought I was too easy to get rid of. I needed to meet with her and make arrangements before we both dealt with Billy. I thought, what the hell? If those 3 are going there, I might as well go with them too. We need to get this over with as soon as possible. So I followed the 3 of them to the scene of the crime. I was catching up with them when I heard Mary gasp and wail, "Oh!" I ran the last few yards. Dickface is gone. Probably bragging about his exploits at the party by now. Maddie was lying where I'd last seen her. Her hand was still covered. Only now her feet were on the floor. She was completely out of it. Mary rushed to her in a frenzy and screamed, "Maddie, wake up, what happened?" It was too obvious what had happened, but Mary wanted an explanation. I got the impression that she and Millie really liked me, and that she knew what this little skit meant for our future. Her 2 male friends looked completely embarrassed. Mary closed Maddie's legs and began to bring her to a sitting position. They moved forward to help. One of them turned to me and said with genuine sympathy in his voice, "I'm sorry." I was comforted by the fact that some of them weren't jerks. I was really sorry. As they struggled to get her to her feet, I walked sadly back to the house. Maddie was so out of it that I knew we'd have to wait until morning to talk. However, I wasn't set on whipped dog mode. I planned on chipping my first piece off the face. In my humble opinion, the worst enemy you can make these days is the super hacker. Unfortunately for Chad, that's exactly what I am. And he had a lot of sins to atone for. The amazing aspect of my art is how little time it takes for very bad things to start happening to the person I'm targeting. He was standing with a group of laughing buddies just outside the patio entrance. They were watching a clip he had recorded on his phone. I heard a faint female voice shouting, "That's it! That feels so good," from the phone, and they all laughed loudly. It didn't cost me a thing to scan his port and throw the usual malware on his phone via Bluetooth receiver. His data plan would suffer, but I didn't care. I owned him now. I sent the clip they were watching to his wife and everyone else in his extensive contact list. The message line said, "Look who I just finished making." I put high priority on that message. I didn't want anyone to miss it. This little prank took me almost 2 minutes of furiously typing on my smartphone as I walked across the patio. The thought of Chad explaining this to his wife, friends, parents, and hopefully his boss and priest satisfied my thirst for revenge for a while. But I was sure his overprivileged life would turn to absolute crap once I got to my real gear at home. There were many worse things I could have done to him, and they were all going to happen. I walked over to the group and put my hand on his shoulder. He turned around aggressively, like he thought we were going to fight. I looked back at him with a wicked grin on my face. He grinned and said, "I've always said Maddie is the best ass I've ever had. She was really hot today. It was just like old times. Maybe I'll do her tomorrow." I said very gently, with feigned compassion, "When bad things start happening to you, please think of me, and I want you to remember that you brought this on yourself." Then I patted him sympathetically on the shoulder and walked away. He said something to his buddies as I walked up the stairs to my room. They all laughed out loud again. His cell phone rang. I smiled bitterly to myself. I walked into our room. Billy was asleep in his sleeping bag at the foot of our double bed. He was an innocent angel hugging a ratty teddy bear. Losing Maddie would be a disaster for him. Screw it. It was devastating to me. I finally had to admit that at the ripe old age of 34, I had finally joined the human race. The excruciating pain was a new sensation for a man working nowhere. The agony and injustice of it all just overwhelmed me. My heart was breaking and I cried at the loss. It felt like the end of the world. In many ways it was for me. I didn't want Billy to hear me, so I lay face forward on the bed, my head buried in the pillow. I was sobbing when I felt the door open, and Mary and Millie quietly enter the room. They were supporting the nearly unconscious Maddie, who lay between them with her hands on their shoulders, looking like a wounded warrior. Before she could realize what I was doing, Mary asked with a laugh in her voice, "What did you do with Chad? He was having some kind of intense argument with his wife on the phone. And then he rushed out of here like the devil was chasing him?" I knew he wasn't going anywhere by airplane, because I added him to the federal list, the TSA no-fly list, and CAPS too, as I sadly walked up the stairs and into my room. I sat up and looked at her, my eyes brimming with tears. I snorted and said, "You're right, but he hasn't seen anything yet." Both Millie and Maddie realized what I was doing. Their faces turned white with shock and fear. Mary understood. She said with misery in her voice, "You must give her a chance to explain. I'm begging you." I said, "I don't think there is any explanation for what I saw. I'm done with her. I knew this was going to happen, and I did it anyway. I can't believe I took my little boy's feelings so lightly. When she sobers up, tell her that the only thing I'm going to give her is the opportunity to help me deal with Billy's pain. You have to convince her that she has to make it up to Billy, or what's about to happen to her friend Chad will seem like a fun day in the park. And if there are any long-term implications for Billy, I'll add your parents to my special little project, since I'm sure they have something to do with it too. You can leave her here. I'll find another room for Billy and me to sleep in." They tossed Maddie onto the bed. She sighed and curled up in a ball. She was still wearing the little black dress, but at least it was pulled up. She rolled over onto her back. Then she began to snore. Meanwhile, I picked up Billy, sleeping bag and all. He struggled a little, and then fell asleep in my arms again. Mary stayed in the room to tuck Maddie under the covers. Millie followed me out into the hallway and into the empty bedroom across the hall from ours. She clasped her hands together mournfully. She fell to her knees in a pleading gesture. "Maddie really loves you. She will die if you leave her. You have to talk to her about this." I said, "What is there to say about Millie?" I saw her engaging in lewd behavior with her childhood sweetheart, and she seemed to enjoy it immensely. She can claim she was drunk, but the effect is still the same. It took her 3 hours to forget about me. Millie began to cry. She said, "Please, I'm begging you. There has to be some other explanation. After what he did to her in college, she hated the guy. He'd be the last person in the world she'd ever mess with. I don't know what happened, but you have to give her a chance to explain." I smiled at Millie and said with genuine affection in my voice, "You are a good sister, but what I saw cannot be explained in any other way than the obvious way. Billy and I will be out of your life forever tomorrow as early as possible. I'm going to tell him that Maddie is having so much fun here with her sisters that she's decided to stay for a while. He won't like it, but he'll buy that explanation if Maddie backs it up. Then I'll hope he forgets who Maddie is. I know that won't happen, but she can work with me so he doesn't feel abandoned. If she refuses to do it, or will play games to get me to forgive her, I'm going to expand the offense to include all of you. It's not a threat. It's just something that needs to happen. Now please go away. I don't want Billy waking up in the middle of my argument with you." She looked completely confused. She wasn't the only one. She turned and closed the door. Anger was written all over her face. I put my sleeping angel back on the floor. I climbed into bed and turned off the light. I thought it would be impossible to sleep. I wouldn't call it sleep, but I collapsed instantly. Full system shock has that effect on a person. My dreams were filled with a deeper sense of sadness and desolation than I could bear, but at least I stopped thinking about my bleak future for a while. When you've been a parent for as many years as I have, a baby waking up is like an alarm clock. And Billy started to move. The sun was streaming through the windows. It would have been a beautiful day if it hadn't been for the events of the previous night. I haven't had the happiest of dreams, but on this day, the transition from sleep to wakefulness was the most unpleasant experience of my life. Reality came crashing down on me like a rabid NFL linebacker, and there was nothing but hopelessness and despair ahead of me. Billy was still coming around slowly, so I peed in the bathroom, brushed my hair and teeth, and pulled on a t-shirt and jeans before going back to him. Now I was ready to deal with everything. Billy looked at me with his bright blue eyes. He asked, puzzled, "Where's Maddie?" His reminder of our loss caused a brief throbbing in my head that nearly knocked me out. But I had to hide it. You can do these super hard things for your child. I lied ingenuously. Oh, she was so happy to see her sisters that she wanted to spend the night with them. I know you'll want to do that with little Chelsea when she's older. Now how about breakfast? Millie can't wait to play with you. He smiled his beautiful, boyish smile and said quite sincerely, "I love Aunt Millie." I said, "She loves you too. Today she wants to take you to the University Museum. There are actually dinosaur skeletons there. You can see them." His eyes widened and he said, "Really?" with quiet awe. I laughed with love for my little nerd. My life will always have meaning as long as I have Billy. I brushed his hair and dressed him in shorts and an alligator polo shirt. He put on his miniature slippers. He fit into this new preppy universe much better than his daddy did. We went out into the hallway. Maddie's door was closed. Mary was sitting in a chair by our door, reading her Kindle. She looked like she had been sent there. She was very nervous. I didn't blame her. She must have been waiting for Billy and me to get up. I threw a warning glance at her and said cheerfully, "There's Mary. She can't wait to take us out to breakfast. Maddie will be here as soon as she wakes up. She had a lot of fun last night, and I know she should be a lot more sleepy than we are." Mary caught the gist of it. She said, "Oh yes, Maddie had such a good time last night that she was very tired. That's why she wanted to sleep a little longer." I said, "I told Billy about Millie's plans to take him to the dinosaurs." Mary looked puzzled. I said softly, but with significance, "Don't you remember what we discussed last night? Millie told me that there were real dinosaur skeletons in the museum, and that she wanted to take Billy away for the day to look at them, while Maddie and I discussed how much fun she had last night." Mary understood. She said with contrived cheerfulness, "Oh yes, how could I have forgotten that? Millie is sitting downstairs at breakfast waiting for you. Why don't you two go down there? I was just about to wake Maddie up." Billy said, "I thought she was sleeping with her sisters?" I got an electric shock. He was too perceptive for a 4-year-old. "This isn't going to be easy." I said, "Yeah, but her sisters woke up before her. They didn't have as much fun as she did." There wasn't an ounce of sarcasm in my voice. I grabbed him and said, "I feel a tickle attack coming on." He squealed with delight, and I ran down the stairs, wrapping my arms around him with a deadly tickle as he giggled ferociously. Millie was waiting at the foot of the stairs. There was a huge grin on her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was misery in them, I said, continuing to portray a cheerful mood. "Here's Millie. She's taking you to the museum for the day." Billy jumped out of my embrace and ran to her. He hugged her gingerly around the waist. She kissed the top of his head. Then she leaned over to talk to him, and he kissed her cheek. Billy announced, "I love Millie as much as I love Maddie." Thank God he didn't see Millie's anguished look and the way her eyes clouded over. Millie said, "Let's feed you two," and led us into the dining room. It wasn't exactly baronial, but it was close to it. There was a buffet on the side table, served in crockery, just like a classic free hotel breakfast should be. I scooped up scrambled eggs and sausage for Billy. I had some yogurt. It was all I could eat. Billy chatted with Millie about what kind of dinosaurs he hoped to see. She looked at him sadly. He realized this and said, "Why are you so sad, Millie?" A wave of shock came over me again. I'd have to resort to clever maneuvers. He was too clever. I said as rationally as possible, "Won't you be sad to part with Millie when we go home?" "Well, she doesn't want you to go home either." He said in the same reasonable tone as if he were talking to a complete idiot. "Then she should come with us." We both laughed, and Millie leaned over and kissed the top of his head. She replied, "Unfortunately, I live here, but we will always be best friends, even if I'm not with you." There was a sense of loss in her voice. He looked at her again and said in his sweetest voice, "I love you, Millie." Millie began to cry. Mary came downstairs. She said to me, "Maddie is awake and wants to talk to you." I said, "I'll do it as soon as we send Billy over to the dinosaurs. Please tell her to wait there and I'll be up in a minute." Millie took the hint and said with cheerful energy, "All right, my junior paleontologist, let's go. The dinosaurs haven't had breakfast yet, and if we keep them waiting too long, they might eat you." Billy squealed and took her hand as they headed for the exit. He began to swing playfully on her arm, the way children do when they hold on to a trusted adult. Millie was laughing now with genuine pleasure. She turned to me, and there was sadness in her eyes again. She said, "Take your time, but remember my words." I promised her I'd do it. Millie and Billy left stage left. I heard the garage door open. At that moment, Mary and Maddie appeared, cautiously descending the stairs. Maddie was still walking unsteadily and looked like she had a monstrous hangover. She was wearing a simple tennis skirt and polo, sockless sneaker shoes. She was clearly scared. She was beautiful. Even after the night she had just been through. She had a little makeup on her eyes and lips. Her hair was neatly tucked away from her face in a ponytail. She didn't even look at me. She walked silently to the sideboard and picked up a black coffee. She sat down across from me, continuing to look down. Mary was sitting next to her. She had obviously told Maddie about what we had witnessed the night before. For a few heartbeats, there was silence in the room. Finally, Maddie looked up at me. You could see the utter devastation in them. I looked at her sadly and said, "Maddie, I love you with all my heart, and there will never be another woman in my life. But there's no way I can trust you after what I saw and heard last night." She wailed, "What? No, you promised." I continued, "Billy loves you. He thinks of you as his mother. It will kill him when I come home without you. I only pray that you have the human compassion to cooperate with me and do whatever it takes to keep it from destroying him. As much as it kills me, I will work with you for his good. I can't help being stupid, but I won't let my gullibility affect my little boy. Fool me once, shame on you later. But there's no further down that road. I can't put Billy at risk again." Maddie cried, "No." Then she put her head down on her crossed arms and sobbed with frank despair. She was like a little child whose heart was completely broken. She was so obviously suffering that I wanted to hug her and comfort her. After all, I loved her like my own life. She lifted her head and looked at me pleadingly. Tears were streaming down her flawless cheekbones and the mascara she'd applied. Mary told me what happened. I wish I could explain it, but I don't remember anything. You have to believe me when I say I just don't remember anything. The last thing I distinctly remember is your father dragging you off to the library. Then Bitsy handed me a glass of champagne. I told her I wasn't going to drink while pregnant. She mocked me and told me one drink wouldn't hurt. My friends all joined in. They said they just wanted to toast the happy couple. I took a couple sips for appearance's sake. The next thing I knew, I was dizzy and about to pass out. That was the last thing I remembered. I woke up in bed this morning feeling like I'd been run over by a truck. I know someone touched me last night. Mary says it was Chad Smithson. That makes the situation even worse. I'm sure they've already told you what he did to me in college. It scares me to even be in the same room with him." She said, "Bill, I love you and only you. I have no idea why I was with that man. You have no idea how much I hated and feared him. If I was going to cheat on you, he'd be the last person on earth I'd do it with. The only explanation I can offer is that what I was given completely erased my memory and removed all my inhibitions. What you saw was a pure animal reaction. It was not a conscious reaction. You and Billy mean everything to me." She looked at me pleadingly. "You have to believe I would never let that evil son of a bitch touch me." I said, "You're obviously going to defend yourself with drugs. And maybe that's true. I don't know about that sort of thing. But my guess is that whatever drug you were given is probably already out of your system, so we'll never be able to find out." She looked at me as if the noose was around her neck, and I had just pulled the gallows lever. I quickly added, "But fortunately, I have a videotape." Maddie and Mary looked at me in amazement. I lowered my head in embarrassment and mumbled something apologetic like, "I didn't have the energy to listen to it last night." So now we're going to find out exactly what happened. And I pressed the play button on the iPad I had placed on the table between us. When I connected to Chad's phone, I copied the souvenir he made of his pas de deux with Maddie. That's exactly what I sent to his wife. The clip started a few seconds after that very moment. He must have pulled out his phone when he hit bottom, and then filmed the rest of their little date, holding it in his hand. In the first few seconds, there were extended sighs and moans. Everything was visible. Maddie groaned and reached for the clipboard to turn it off. Mary gently took her hand. She shook her head. Like me, she knew we had to get everything on the table. The cinematography was surprisingly good considering what he was doing with it at the same time. It was obviously a trophy night, not an evening for personal enjoyment. He focused on the photograph. The focus shifted to Maddie's face. She was in a state of extreme lust. Her head was thrown back. She was lost in a frenzy of sensation and unbridled release. Maddie is a white-hot flame, and when her buttons are pushed, the result is inevitable, which is what we witnessed. "I froze the picture," I said. "At that moment, I left the scene. I witnessed everything we've seen so far in the flesh." Maddie blushed with shame. I added, "Up until now your story could have been true, but I've never seen the video, and after that, something really incriminating could come out. Are you strong enough to hear the rest of it?" Given the stakes, I wasn't sure that was the case. She nodded quickly and fatalistically. She seemed to have just bet her entire happiness on one roll of the dice. I pressed play again. Then we heard Maddie's voice pleading loudly, "Oh my God, I'm yours. I'll always be yours." Then came the sound of a loud ending to this scene. There was a short silence that was filled with gasps. Then there was some movement as her lover finally wrapped things up, still holding the phone. He chuckled, hearing her reaction. Then he stood up and muttered something like, "You won't remember this, but I'll always know how much you enjoyed it." A mask of horror froze on Maddie's face as she sat at the table. My selfish feeling was joy. She was stupefied. We could hear him picking himself up, and the picture twitched madly as he did so. Then he staggered down the path, wobbling like he'd just had a couple rounds with Iron Mike Tyson. I knew from experience that fighting with Maddie could have that effect on you. He focused on her again for the final shot. She was lying in exactly the same position we had met her in, unconscious. When the clip ended, he chuckled, perfectly pleased with himself. I solemnly promised that I would use every trick in the hacker's handbook to turn his miserable life into utter crap. Most importantly, we all realized what those last few seconds meant. Maddie thought she was doing it with me. It is a fact that the Titanic sent an SOS signal by radio for the first time. The operator transmitted the message until the very end. He did not want to die without letting the world know what had happened. The last few seconds were just as hopeless. Like the Titanic, disaster struck Maddie's consciousness, but her subconscious was still active, and it was still able to longingly transmit her thoughts. It was obvious that this wasn't some clever ruse to cover up her cheating. In the state Maddie was in, there was no way she could have been that insidious. First of all, she was almost unconscious. Secondly, she obviously didn't know she was being filmed. And finally, there was no one there to hear her except the piece of shit that was with her. Luckily, the dumbass wrote it all down. And that tape was irrefutable proof that she hadn't betrayed me. To say Maddie and I were relieved is an understatement. She looked as if the governor had called for a reprieve, just as the executioner reached for the switch. And I felt as if the 5-point hurricane had been followed by a bright sky. So much relief had not been written on two faces probably since the end of World War II. Then, as scripted, the perpetrators went in for breakfast. They must have both heard what I had just played. Both of them had thunderous looks. Mary cast an indignant glance at them. There was steel in her voice. "Mom and Dad, we need to talk." The mother looked defiant. She said, "You don't tell me what I should do, young lady." Maddie looked at her mother with absolute contempt and said, "Sit down, Mom." Her mother noticed the look. It was pure, unconcealed hatred. Her father read it. He took his wife by the hand and sat her down at the table. He said, "You knew we would have to discuss this sooner or later, my dear." Maddie's mom sat there with a defiant look. I thought, Maddie got her brains from her daddy, not her mommy. I looked at her father and said, "You know who I am now and what I do, don't you?" Her father said, "Walter brought me up to speed after you left. You should have told me." I said, "It wasn't really any of your business, but I may make you my business, depending on what happens next." Her mother snorted angrily and said, "Is that a threat, young man?" Her father surprised us all. He said sternly, "For once in your life, Martha, shut up." I said it in my gentlest tone. "I just need to know why you did it. You owe us that." He looked a little embarrassed and said, "Until our conversation with Walter, we didn't think you were good enough for our daughter. You have to understand what it looked like for us. No education and no apparent career. You just didn't fit. Parents protect their child. You would do the same for your son, right? So, yes, we conspired with a few of Maddie's friends to set her up with someone we thought would be a better fit. At our request, some of her friends contacted her ex-boyfriend Chad Smithson, and he flew down here from Omaha in a flash to try to talk her out of marrying you. They grew up with each other. He comes from a good family. He has an MBA from Harvard, and he has a very promising career. He never understood why he and Maddie broke up. He told us he's always loved her and would do anything to get another chance. He wants to marry her." I asked conversationally. "Did he say how his real wife would feel about it?" Both of her parents said, "Chad got married?" I softly replied, "Probably not for long," and pressed play again. While I was connected to Chad's phone, I recorded the last conversation. A very angry female voice said, "You're a total bastard. You're not on a last-second business trip. Someone just sent me a video of you with that stupid Maddie Wilson. I didn't pay attention to your cheating because I had no concrete proof. Needless to say, I'm going to use this video to rip you off for all you're worth. Anita, it's not what you think. I couldn't help myself. You know what she was like at Harvard. She picked on me. She wouldn't leave me alone. I'm only human. It was just an evening. I love you and only you." He had maxed out the delirium meter. That's why he stopped. She ended the conversation by saying, "And don't you dare come home. I'll get a restraining order before you get back." I said conversationally, "Since the last thing I did last night was add old man Chad to TSA's no-fly and caps too, getting home may take a little longer than they anticipated." The image of this scraggly piece of shit coming back to Omaha on the Greyhound made me smile. Maddie's parents looked stunned. Maddie wailed. Anita was a sorority sister. Honestly, it seemed a little out of place to me. But that said, Maddie's mind was a complete mess at that point. They had put her through hell, and now she had to listen to this. Her mother was staring straight ahead. She looked like she'd just had a lobotomy. The woman's eyes reflected confusion. Apparently, the certainty of her overprivileged life was not as absolute as it had been a few minutes ago. I turned to her father, who was apparently the only parent in possession of his feelings. I said, "Did you know in advance that he would use the pot to use it again?" Both of her parents said, "He took advantage of her?" Their voices were far from shocked. Then both of them added, almost in unison, "Again?" Mary said, with utter contempt in her voice. "He's always been a predator. Everyone knows that. He's been using Maddie since college. That's why she was so afraid of him. Last night, you two just served her up on a platter to be drugged again and used. I am ashamed and embarrassed to be your daughter," Maddie's mother repeated in a ghostly voice. "He took advantage of her? Oh my God, he took advantage of her?" Her father put his arm around her shoulders and said, "Come on, Martha. We'll get you something. You need to lie down." Then he turned to me and said, "We need to talk some more." I said, "What's all this? We need to talk nonsense. I'm leaving for Washington as soon as Billy gets back. I hope Maddie will agree to go with me. It was traumatic for me, and worse for her. We don't need either of you. Maddie will forgive you someday. After all, she is your daughter. But I'll never forgive. And if I were you, I'd be careful about my online presence from now on." Then I turned to Mary and said, "Of course, since you and Millie are honorary aunts, we want you both to be around our 6 future children as often as possible." She gave me the most loving smile. My Maddie, the love of my life, was given to a predator because her snobby parents didn't think I was good enough for her? Screw them. I turned to her father and added, "I have nothing to say to you. and you absolutely have nothing to say to us. If it weren't for the fact that your right type is also a pervert and wrote down his little souvenir, I'd never have proof that I could trust Maddie. And I would walk away from the best thing that could have happened to me in 10 lifetimes. No amount of talking will help you forget this. You tried to ruin my life, and through your fault, your daughter has been subjected to it in the most horrible way. Now you know who I am, and I can assure you that you will regret it yet. I really wasn't going to carry out that threat, but it told me that I had gone too far. So I took a step back, turned, and walked out onto the terrace in a burst of anger. Maddie hurried out and gingerly stood in front of me. She put her hands on my shoulders as I gasped with rage. She looked at me solemnly with her beautiful, intelligent eyes. They looked deep into my soul. Then she lifted up on her tiptoes, gave me the sweetest, most innocent kiss, and timidly said, "We're good, aren't we?" It was a simple question that hid a whole world of hope and suffering. I thought I'd lost her. And if it hadn't been for Chad's accidental desire to have something to remember her by, we would have gone our separate ways. In one day, I went from blessed, through broken, to grateful. It was as close to falling into the abyss as one can get. I said with boundless relief, "We'll always be okay, as long as it never ends. I promise I'll never stop loving you." On the other hand, as a result of the past 12 hours, I felt there was a sea change in our relationship, and maybe that was a good thing for us. I always thought Maddie was too good for me. In the end, that insecurity ruined our relationship. Married people should be, as the Bible says, bound equally. And so far, Maddie had always been the dominant one. All the leverage was in her hands, and deep down, she knew it. However, after seeing her with Chad, I was fully prepared to pick up Billy and leave. I resigned myself to the fact that it was over between us and mentally moved on. She realized that I had made a commitment to leave and was determined to do so. And it was killing her. It strengthened my hand immeasurably. It would be agonizing if I had to leave her in the future. But it was always a viable option that I knew I could accept. And Maddie knew that too. In my opinion, this newfound strength only brought us closer together. We were now on a more equal footing. I also think the events of the last 24 hours have opened Maddie's eyes and increased her respect for me as a potential life partner. In every way, Maddie is a traditional honors student. She has all the pedigree and credentials of a college, but it was my unconventional black art that saved the day. And the knowledge of my underground friends and associates made her father gasp. More importantly, at this particular moment, our new, closer to equal status was clearly turning her on. I looked into those feline eyes and saw hunger and unrequited lust in them. She wanted the one with the grimace in the worst possible way. I took her hand, turned her to face the patio, and said, "Let's take a little walk." As we walked out onto the lawn, we headed toward a gazebo visible in the distance. She said with trepidation in her voice, "Where are we going?" "I don't want to go back there. Mary said that's where it happened." I said a little more forcefully than I could have, "That's exactly where we're headed. We will return there now to thoroughly exorcise any demons that may haunt the place." Maddie let out a small sob of relief and hugged my arm. She said with her former seriousness, "Now do you understand what I was talking about? Do you see how I grew up and how much pressure I was under all the time? If you do, you'll understand why I want the life we have now. I want it with every fiber of my being. You can consider that selfishness if you want, but I will never risk losing that state of peace and acceptance and companionship, and the absolute reward of the many children I will give you. We've gotten stronger by going through this, but I'd rather you take our bond for what it really was. You're a good man, and I respect you too much to hurt you in any way. I've been yours from the moment I saw you sitting in that chair. I will always be yours. I will never betray you willingly." That was something to think about as we walked. I'd always counted on Maddie feeling our deep personal connection, but I'd never understood her motives. After spending a weekend with Dr. and Mrs. Dr. Machiavelli and being introduced to the most shallow and mean-spirited set of friends a girl could ever dream of, I understood why she wanted to get out of this quagmire of despondency. And I realized for the first time why she was jealous of me and not the other way around. Not many people have friends who could get you into a situation like the one Maddie was in. Worse, they did it on behalf of a man who most of them knew had committed an unpardonable crime. The old adage, with friends like these, definitely applies here as well. Maddie and her sisters are sincere, loving people with a strong sense of self-worth and a desire to do the right thing. They all adore children, which speaks to their kind and caring nature. More importantly, they have unselfishly and without hesitation supported each other in all our troubles. I still remember Millie on her knees begging me not to throw Maddie away. Considering that she was also 3 or 4 levels above me, her willingness to humble herself for her sister's sake spoke volumes about what kind of person she was. I didn't need to be a more astute nerd than I am to realize that Maddie is the woman I always thought she was, kind, generous, and completely devoted to her family. The easy rapport and friendship that has been a hallmark of our relationship since we met is something that is inherent in couples who have been married for a long time. You can't learn it. It's in you from the beginning. That is, if you choose the right partner. That she was also the most beautiful woman in all of DC was exactly what you'd expect from a woman whose soul burned bright with Maddie's fire. And now, I was sure that all that fire was dedicated to me. I looked at her as we walked down the fateful path to the scene of yesterday's crime. I could almost understand what motivated that bastard to do what he did. Maddie's a walking wet dream. Her face could be called simply gorgeous. Perfectly proportioned dark features, huge eyes, and a full-wide sensual mouth. She's below average height, but she's also very full. However, it is her general aura of happiness, her spirit with an unquenchable need to love and be loved. This is what sets her apart and captivates me. Everyone sees it. I remember the reaction of my neighbors the first day Maddie and I were together. Maddie interacted with me as if we had been married for years, which caused some confusion for Tom and Nancy since they had never seen me with a woman before. It was sort of a, "Where have you been hiding your wife?" kind of thing. We reached the gazebo. She was scared. I could see it in her eyes. I said, "We're going to erase all traces of last night from this space with an explosion of a real marital moment." She looked terrified. She said, "I was lying on that couch. I saw it on the video, but I don't remember." I looked into her huge, wide-set cat eyes and saw that she was both upset at the thought of what had happened there and craving unbridled jungle fun with me right now. I hissed at her and turned her to face me. I kissed her gently. I was a foot taller than she was, and she had to stand on tiptoe to do it. But she kissed me back with simple tenderness and affection, as a wife should. And then she was overcome with desire. It was as if she had been struck by lightning. Her small, hard body tensed. She had one hand behind my head and the other wrapped around my neck, letting out light sighs. Then she groaned loudly and literally climbed on top of me like a pole. She high-fived me, throwing her head back and wrapping her arms tightly around my neck. She wriggled frantically while nestled in front of me and hugging me like a spider monkey. The whole thing was both an indescribable comedy and the coolest thing I'd ever experienced. I walked us both to the couch. Her head was still thrown back, her arms around my neck, almost strangling me. And she persisted with her mantra, "Do it to me." I sat her down on the couch. Her legs were still wrapped around me. I knew I wouldn't be able to talk some sense into her. She was so out of control that she was clearly in a world of her own. Still, I couldn't clear the deck until I got her to stop pouncing on me like a distraught terrier. I pushed her back onto the couch. Then she lifted one hand to cover her eyes, just like last night. The image of Chad, in exactly the same pose, flashed through my mind. Anger overwhelmed me, and I stopped all participation for a while. Maddie was so consumed with her desire that she didn't even notice what had happened. Her mouth was open in an O shape. I couldn't see her eyes, which were under her arm. Chad had been here with her for a full 15 minutes and hadn't gotten that reaction. She opened her eyes and hissed, "You have to do it! Do it now!" She was at the mercy of an overwhelming lust, so much so that her voice grew deeper. At that moment, she almost looked like one of the demons from the anime. I got the old Lucifer. It was as hard as molybdenum and looked like the Empire State Building. Maddie would have done it with any man, but in this case, her exclusive need for me was something special. I pushed into the center of an active volcano. It was so hot inside that I almost burned myself. Its walls shook. She let out a loud snort that could be heard throughout the house. She screamed, "I love you!" All of this was said in a tone as if she was at Churchill Downs. It was the Kentucky Derby, and she was cheering the horse she had just bet on all the way to the finish line. I've been spending all my energy. All the while, only a very liquid squelching sounded. It was like she was doing a hula dance that made me spin in a 360-degree arc in her. I looked at her beautiful face. It was lost in passion, her mouth wide open and her eyes rolled back. This last vision had done its work, and I was completely unconscious. I heard myself let out a low growl, and then it became more like a scene from Animal Planet. I grunted like a wild boar, she squealed with outright passion. It wasn't so much an enjoyable evening as it was a cage fight. I apologize for interrupting my listening, but I will say right off the bat that this scene is not complete. I couldn't take it anymore and finished what I started. Finished isn't quite the right word. It felt different. It was a delightful sensation, maximum pain and supreme pleasure in one moment. It took me a very long time to regain my awareness. She was passed out, lying on her back, breathing like a sprinter. Her arms were at her sides, her feet were on the floor. She looked like no woman since Eve. It was almost the same pose I saw her in last night when we came to get her. Jealousy and anger flared and subsided. She slowly opened her eyes. She looked panic-stricken. I said with all the tenderness and love I could muster, "Welcome back, my love." There were many meanings in this statement, and all of them were sincere. She smiled wistfully and said, "I adore you." I've never done that in my life. Maybe it was the fear of your loss and the horror of last night, but it was over the top. I felt like all the insides were being squeezed out of me. I continued to lean on my knees. The intense heat coming from her woke up the old Lucifer. The second round was in full swing. The sluggish Maddie was instantly replaced by my energetic partner. She slapped my arm and said, "Get off. We have to get back to the house before Billy gets back to straighten things out. I don't want him to even suspect what happened. And thanks to you, I have a hell of a lot of cleaning to do." She began to gather her closet. I laughed, getting up and zipping up my zipper. The Maddie I knew was back. We were back together and enthusiastic, and all the evil spirits of the past preppies were banished from this world. We entered the lounge area through the patio. Thank goodness it was only Mary sitting there. We both looked so well refreshed that I'm sure her parents would have flogged us. I had the physically exhausted look of someone who had been through a brisk workout with a Marine sergeant. Maddie's beautiful thick hair looked like she'd put it through a wind tunnel. Her bra was so thoroughly ruined. I didn't even want to think about why that was. Mary looked delighted. She said with a slight sneer, "Well, I see you two have it all worked out." Maddie walked over to Mary and kissed her gently on the cheek. She said simply, "Thank you." Mary wept. Maddie said, "We have overcome our present misfortune, and there will never be anything to keep us apart again. We're going to the courthouse to get married, and we want you and Millie to come with us." It was news to me, welcome news, but news nonetheless. But I am a well-trained man. I know who holds the script. Maddie added, "I'm sorry, but please don't tell my mother or father. Someday I will forgive them, but right now the wounds are too deep." That's when Billy and Millie showed up. Mary must have called her to let her know it was all clear. Billy was beyond excited. In a plastic bag, he clutched half a museum of souvenir fossils. He said excitedly, "Millie bought them for me. I can build my own collection." I thought, seriously, a handler? How old is this kid? Millie walked over to me and kissed me lightly on the cheek. She said, "This means everything to me." I took her by both hands and said, "You were a rock. I can never repay you." It was Millie's turn to clam up. Maddie was back in her usual upbeat mood. She said, "You all need to get dressed. We have a wedding to attend." I was afraid Millie's scream of delight would get their parents' attention, but apparently Martha was out somewhere, and Bud must have been riding around the grounds, or one of the maids, or whatever the lord of the manor does in his spare time. Maddie went upstairs with Billy. I went upstairs with them. Of course, I was immediately banished from the bride's room. She said it was bad luck. I thought, God, how much worse could our luck get? But I didn't want to tempt fate. I was sitting downstairs, reading and drinking tea, when Maddie came downstairs to see Billy. I dropped my cup in surprise. She was wearing a simple vintage Laura Ashley dress. It was pure white linen, with a low neck in the front, and it said, "My wedding dress" on it. The shoes were taupe-colored with a 4-inch heel, and she did her best to make women look exceptional. Maddie's beauty is a scientific fact. There is a mathematical concept called the golden ratio, which is the proportional arrangement of things perceived as beauty by humans. Mattie's face is exactly in that proportion, 1.618 or phi, and it's hypnotizing. I couldn't stop looking at her, but I pulled away from that beautiful face as soon as I saw who she was leading by the hand up the stairs. It was a little boy in a child's morning dress. He looked as proud as he could possibly be. Since it had obviously been made for Billy, it must have been their little secret. She looked at me slyly and said, "I needed someone to give me away, and you needed a best man." We were driven to downtown Ann Arbor in a big black Suburban, not unlike the ones I see the president in Washington. Millie was wearing a pure silk dress with a floral print, at once simple and screaming of expensive. Mary was wearing one of her usual business dresses. She is a partner in a CPA firm. Her outfit was stylish and at the same time incredibly sexy. The ceremony was officiated by a judge who, of course, was familiar with Dr. Bud and Dr. Martha. Maddie nonchalantly explained that they wouldn't be able to make it to the ceremony. The judge looked skeptical. Maddie looked like a lawyer. The judge conducted the ceremony. The moment he got to the point of asking, "Who gives to this woman?" a small voice beside her said firmly and adamantly, "I." When the judge asked for a ring, my best man of 4 years, who had now moved to stand next to me, pulled out a shiny ring I had made especially for my new wife. She's never seen him. Billy and I can keep secrets too. It was a flawless blue Ceylon sapphire with 5-carat diamonds between 2-carat diamonds on a white gold ring. After spending a lot of money on it, I realized that the next few generations will be wearing it at their weddings. When I put it on her finger, it shone like a supernova star. She gasped in surprise. 2 bridesmaids had broken protocol to invite her to watch. The judge did his part by pronouncing us husband and wife. Then he stomped off to his office. I guessed he was going to call old Bud. 2 enthusiastic women crowded around the bride. Then Maddie threw herself into my arms, hugged that tight little body with the big soft breasts, and said with authority in her voice, "You may kiss the bride." Did I mention she was bossy? And now, my dear viewer, the epilogue. It was induction week. Billy stood among the unwavering ranks of midshipmen dressed in white. As a battalion commander, he stood in front of his battalion in formation. He had already qualified for the forward strike line of naval aviation. Today, he was scheduled to go on duty at NAS Pensacola. Only Maddie gave our son the confidence to become an aircraft carrier pilot. She stood beside me, my perfect spouse, and looked at him proudly. She raised the little flawed boy into the outstanding specimen of all-American masculinity that stands before us. She also managed to transform a lonely 34-year-old nerd into a 52-year-old man of some influence and wealth. My exquisite Chelsea stood beside me and cried silently. She was crying tears of joy. She and Billy had always had a special bond. Maddie had created it. I didn't think any woman could eclipse Maddie in feminine beauty, but my beautiful Chelsea did. But Chelsea is going to MIT rather than heading off to read classics at her mother's alma mater. Apparently, gorgeous 18-year-old girls with Chelsea's such formidable talents in math and theoretical calculus are pretty rare. I'd like to think she got some of those skills from me, but her mom is a smartass. The rest of my kids were standing next to Maddie, holding little signs congratulating Billy. There was a perfect 2 years difference between them. They were both as bright and well-mannered as one would expect from any product of Maddie's motherhood. 16-year-old Janie is an athlete. She is already above average height, just like her Aunt Mary. She has just been named to the ODP National Women's Youth Soccer Team. Where Chelsea has the extreme beauty of Maddie, Janie is more like the goddess Athena. She has a natural, almost aesthetic beauty that radiates health and athleticism. She's interested in boys, but she's much more interested in being a female Olympian. Long-haired 14-year-old Tom is the one I'm claiming. He's the one who mastered my black arts. Only he did it when he was 10. I knew I had to train him to stay on the other side of the line. It was a smart move on my part, because he had already surpassed me as a super hacker. But he's the original good guy white hat cyberspace. And I'm sure the adults using his skills would probably faint if they found out how old he really is. Millie and her husband were standing on the other side of me, She went into medicine and has been a practicing pediatrician for 10 years. There are other specialties that pay more. But Millie loves children, and they are the ones she wants to help all her life. Her husband is a great guy and a real man. He works for USAID, so Millie has had many opportunities to take care of children in some very interesting places in the third world. They plan to have a brood of their own once Millie has had her fill of saving the world. Mary never married. She made senior partner at Deloitte, but she is definitely not an old maid. Mary seems to like gorgeous and very playful with lots of variety. And with her money, she could choose. The guy standing next to her was some Brazilian stallion about 10 years younger. He might as well have shown up on a leash. I have the perfect friend and life partner. We raise children, live the same life, and spend as much time together as possible visiting interesting places. Maddie still turns heads, especially when we are in Italy, and she's still the best girl in the neighborhood. I didn't have the heart to doubt my luck, but I always wondered what would have happened if I hadn't succumbed to my voyeuristic nature. I know some of you are thinking, how can you go through life with a woman you met that very evening? And I understand. But it's hard to argue with a lifetime's worth of results. There's no moral to this story. Except that every once in a while, a man who doesn't work anywhere like me can get lucky. But if Lady Luck favors you, hold on tight, because the ride could get bumpy. Ladies and gentlemen, what an extraordinary journey we have been on together. And some have been on it before, having joined us on the Patreon. From the dark depths of betrayal and deceit to the triumphant heights of love and redemption, this story has been nothing short of a roller coaster ride. Moving on to the epilogue, we see the characters standing on the threshold of a new chapter shaped by tumultuous events. First of all, let's applaud Maddie, a woman of strength and resilience who, against all odds, became the architect of her own destiny. From the languid depths of a deceptive setup to the radiant glow of wedded bliss, Maddie's journey was one of transformation and empowerment. Our protagonist, once a self-proclaimed, lonely 34-year-old nerd, found himself in a maze of emotions, discovering layers of himself that he never knew he had. The revelation that love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that it can heal even the deepest wounds, was the driving force behind this narrative. The supporting actors, from Millie's steadfast sister to Billy, the blossoming naval aviator, brought their own unique nuances to the canvas of this story. Each character, flawed and imperfect, played a crucial role in shaping the fate of our protagonists. The epilogue, in which we witness the joining of two souls in holy matrimony, serves as a testament to the indestructible spirit of love. The ceremony, shrouded in mystery, unfolds with a mixture of emotions, pride, joy, and a hint of melancholy because of the wounds inflicted in the past. The final scene before us is a picture of a growing family, where the children are a symbol of a future born out of resilience and determination. Maddie, who was once the object of deceit, now represents a loving mother and wife. The bonds formed in the crucible of adversity are now the threads that weave the family together. This story is a reminder that the plot of life is unpredictable and often unfolds in ways we least expect. It teaches us that love in its purest form can heal, transform, and create a tapestry of joy, even in the face of despair. So, my dear viewers, as we bid farewell to this fascinating story, may it serve as a beacon of hope and a celebration of the resilience of the human spirit. Until our paths cross again in another story, may your own journeys be filled with love, redemption, and strength to overcome life's challenges. And as always, don't forget to subscribe for more stories of love, mystery, and the unpredictable twists and turns that make life truly amazing. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and stay tuned for more exciting new stories.